Sunny swayed slightly and thrust the soul serpent into the ground, leaning on it for support. His breath was labored and ragged. The wound on his neck had already disappeared, but drops of crimson blood remained on the onyx surface of his fearsome armor. All around him, the crowd was going crazy, chanting his arena name over and over. The fight against the noble queen had not been as savage and bloody as some of his previous ones, but it had been incomparably harder. Even though each of the fighters had only managed to land one strike, the mental strain and physical effort the duel had required of them was nothing short of tremendous. Facing a true battle master was a tough trial. Sunny was completely spent. But more than that, he was also bitter and full of fury. He snarled out a frustrated curse, damning the fact that he had almost had it, not paying the crowd any attention. He closed his eyes and tried to concentrate on the dissipating sensation he had felt during the last seconds of the intense battle against the undefeated champion of the Dreamscape. During their fight, after grasping the secret of the elusive queen, he had come close to making a breakthrough in his mastery of the shadow dance. It had been so close that Sunny could practically see it. But in the end, he failed to make the last step. There was an invisible obstacle in his way that had pushed him back. One that he didn't know how to overcome. Something was still missing. All the styles he had absorbed created a vast and solid foundation, but it was not enough. At this point, he knew that the problem was not quantity. He had already done the groundwork. Then what? What did he need to do to bring this stage of shadow dance to completion? Find a unifying element. Face even more formidable opponents. Sunny didn't know, which made him extremely frustrated. However, he didn't receive any time to savor his frustration or consider the issue deeper, because a thundering voice suddenly drowned out the roar of the crowd. Up on the central tribune, the saint of the Dreamscape had risen from their seat and was now looking down with a brilliant smile already in the middle of an excited speech. Sunny muttered to himself that he had won and was about to receive his reward. Sunny grinned behind the mask and straightened, lifting the odachi and putting it back on his shoulder. The reward. Wasn't this why he had entered the tournament in the first place? And now, it was finally time to reap it. The saint was going on and on, showering Sunny with praise. The grandiloquent words poured down from the tribune, a string of grand phrases about glory, marvelous deeds, the duty of the awakened true warriors, bravery, courage, and the future of humanity.
Gods, can you just get to the point?
Sunny didn't care about all that nonsense. He just wanted to receive his prize and disappear. However, he had to stand in the middle of the arena like the world's most fearsome scarecrow and endure the endless barrage of flowery words flying out of the grandiloquent saint's mouth. For a while, he grumbled under his breath that this person really liked the sound of their own voice. At least it gave him a chance to recover, after something that felt like an eternity. The saint was finally finished with their long speech and gestured at the representative of valor. The saint declared that the representative would personally reward the winner. As the crowd applauded, the young woman in black armor stood up and approached the parapet of the tribune, then smiled at the audience and looked down at Sunny. Suddenly, he felt a small shiver run down his spine. The young woman was smiling in a friendly manner, but her eyes were as cold as the sharpest of swords. They were also of a strange, vibrant color, bright red, the same as her full lips and vermilion cape. With her alabaster skin and raven black hair, she looked both beautiful and daunting like a lethal blade. The pressure she exerted could be felt even from where Sunny stood. He breathed out a quiet realization that she was a master. The young woman spoke, her raspy voice easily reaching all across the arena. It sounded friendly enough as well as strangely familiar for some reason. She introduced herself as Ascended Morgan of Clan Valor, congratulated him as a warrior, and remarked what a splendid duel it had been, calling him a truly worthy winner. Sunny stared at her for a moment, then bowed his head slightly, expressing his respect. Well, pretending to. Smiling in response, Morgan of Valor continued. She told him he was truly worthy of wielding a memory forged by the smiths of the great Clan Valor, and declared that his remarkable skill had brought her so much joy that she had decided to gift him one of her personal armaments.
Jackpot.
The thing Sunny had hoped would happen did, indeed, happen. Ascended Morgan seemed to be in a very good mood. Whatever it was that a master of one of the great clans had in her arsenal was bound to be good. The young woman waited for the excited cheers of the crowd to quiet down and looked at him with a curious smile. She asked him what he wished to receive and offered a weapon.
Yes, a weapon would be great.
Sonny started to smile, but then, suddenly, his eyes widened. He cursed under his breath, and before he could think of a crafty lie, the flaw forced an answer out of his mouth, and he muttered a hollow denial.
Crab, 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 and cursed.
Morgan of Valor tilted her head a little. She asked if he wanted a suit of armor then, or perhaps a powerful charm.
Yes, both would be good.
Sonny gritted his teeth, but the result was inevitable. He had no choice but to answer in a hollow voice, and he conceded that he wanted neither. The young woman laughed. She asked if perhaps he wanted to receive an echo then.
Oh no.
Mongrel remained silent for several seconds, and then answered that he did not. Sonny was on the verge of shedding bloody tears. How had it all gone so wrong so fast? Master Morgan studied him for a bit, then leaned on the parapet and asked in an amused voice. She asked him with amused curiosity what he wanted then. Sonny panicked. He obviously wanted to receive one of the rewards she had mentioned, but it was precisely because he did that Weaver's mask would not allow him to say it. He scrambled to salvage the situation and get at least something out of this disaster. Suddenly, a crazy idea appeared in his mind, and then, in front of countless thousands of people, Mongrel said something shocking. He declared that he wanted to duel her, Ascended Morgan. Mongrel just turned a reward ceremony into a duel challenge, and that is only the beginning. If you are enjoying this ride, like this episode and subscribe for the next one. Now, back to the story. A stunned silence settled over the resplendent arena. A sea of spectators was staring at Sonny with wide eyes, not sure if they had heard it right. Even the saint seemed shocked and uncertain about what to do. Surely, Mongrel had not just challenged a master of the great clan Valor to a fight. In that silence, a bright laughter suddenly rang, rolling over the vast courtyard. It was Morgan. She was laughing with a delighted expression on her face, her striking vermilion eyes full of mirth and amusement. A few moments later, she looked down and asked, her raspy voice relaxed and steady. She asked with amused disbelief if he really wanted to fight her. Sonny stared at her from below and nodded. He answered yes. But of course, he didn't. He might have been a little bit crazy, but not nearly crazy enough to wish to fight an Ascended serving one of the sovereigns. Hell, that Morgan girl could have been Anvil's own daughter, for all Sonny knew. However, the fact that he would rather avoid such a confrontation didn't mean that fighting Morgan would be of no benefit to him. In fact, Sonny felt that it could push him to finally mastering the second step of Shadow Dance. A member of a great clan had to have a lot to teach him. He mused that if he won, she might give him the reward anyway, since anything else would just look petty. So, even if Sonny was against the idea, it was the best bad idea he had managed to come up with. As for how he was supposed to win against a master, that depended on Morgan herself, if Sonny was right. She would not unleash her full power on him, be it out of pride, a sense of fairness, or simply to save face. The young woman, meanwhile, was still looking at him from above. Her scarlet lips were curved into a slight smile. She called it an audacious wish. She leaned back, and in the next moment, the crowd gasped. Morgan of Valor easily jumped over the parapet and plunged down, soon landing on the floor of the arena dozens of meters below. A whirlwind of rose petals rose into the air from the force of the impact, but the young woman herself seemed unperturbed. She simply straightened and walked toward Sonny with the same easy smile. He instantly tensed, muttering a curse that she had actually accepted. Until then, Sonny still had hoped that Morgan would refuse his daring request, but she seemed pleased by it instead. Stopping opposite Sonny, the young woman studied him for a bit and then glanced back at the tribune. She addressed the saint as Venerable Thane and asked if they would oblige. The bewildered saint remained silent for a few moments and then cleared their throat. The saint agreed a bit uncertainly. Almost immediately, the pleasant voice announced,
"Challenger Morgan has entered the arena. Morgan has challenged Mongrel."
She smiled, then turned back to Sunny. She remarked that was better. Morgan studied him for a moment and then shook her head. She said that wouldn't work. As an Ascended, she couldn't expect an Awakened, even one as skilled and distinguished as him, to really have a chance in a duel against her. She asked what they should do. She thought for a bit and then smiled again. She announced that she had an idea. With that, her dark armor and vermilion cape suddenly disintegrated into a torrent of scarlet sparks. The young woman was left standing in a simple black tunic, her feet bare. She then proceeded to hide one hand behind her back and summoned an unremarkable straight sword into the other. She declared that she would only use one hand and a dormant weapon. If he survived against her for 1 minute, the win would be his. That, she said, should be fair. Sunny scowled behind the mask. He grumbled that she was too full of herself. What an arrogant woman, and then caught himself thinking she was pretty, and corrected himself with annoyed emphasis that she was just arrogant. No matter how he felt about it, Morgan's offer was exactly what Sunny had wanted. This way, he really stood a chance. Even better, there was no need to augment himself with shadows and reveal more of his strength. He just had to fight for 60 seconds and try to learn as much as he could in that short time. And if he happens to win, maybe the prize would still be his. Lowering the Soul Serpent, Sunny stared at his Ascended opponent and calmly asked if they should start. Her smile widened. She told him his wish was her command and called him my Lord Mongrel. Then she offered a piece of advice for the future, that he should really be careful what he wished for. Just a moment later, Sunny realized that 60 seconds were going to be an eternity. He stammered out a shocked demand of what the hell, whether she was even human, and then cursed as the blows rained down. Sunny didn't have words to describe how monstrous Morgan was. It was obvious that she held back and did not use all of her strength, but even then, he was instantly overwhelmed. The young woman in a simple black tunic was just too swift, nimble, and skilled. She read his movements as though he was an open book and easily demolished his defense, raining a barrage of strikes on the onyx surface of the mantle of the underworld, even though her sword was too weak to break the adamantine armor. Each blow carried enough might behind it to make Sunny shudder and for flashes of sharp pain to radiate through his entire body. He was certain that his bones would have already cracked if it wasn't for the bone weave. He tasted blood. What's worse, Morgan of Valor had no blemishes on her mentality, as Dar of the Maharana clan or Queen Bee had. She was as vicious and ruthless as he himself was, maybe even more so, a born killer. And while Sunny barely had a couple of years of battle experience, she was an older and much more terrifying beast. She was tempered, her skill was forged and sharpened by thousands of bloody battles. That much was obvious. Just a few seconds later, he was already barely staying alive. He cursed and demanded to know how he was supposed to survive that. Feeling his flesh break apart and his heart grow cold, Sunny scrambled to defend himself, but to no avail. Morgan easily crushed his attempts to resist and delivered another series of devastating strikes, moving with terrifying precision and speed. Her movements were fluid and natural, as though wielding a weapon was as innate to her as breathing, as though battle was her native environment instead of peace. Her swordsmanship was unlike anything Sunny had ever seen too. It wasn't even as though the sword served as an extension of Morgan's arm. It was as though she herself was the sword, and so every motion she made was the purest expression of cold, merciless killing intent. He had never thought that he would meet a more terrifying swordsman than Nephi's, but compared to this knight of valor, the daughter of the immortal Flame clan almost seemed like a novice. Sunny was instantly overwhelmed, and there was nothing he could do to maintain even a sliver of control. The situation was utterly hopeless. This feeling of absolute, bitter powerlessness. He had not experienced it in a long time, attain a breakthrough to the second step of Shadow Dance. Sunny wasn't even sure that he would be able to stay alive for another couple of seconds. He had to think of something fast. Following a mental command, the mantle of the underworld received one of his charms. Immediately, the familiar but strongly enhanced pain of his soul being torn apart flooded his whole being with agony. Sunny didn't hope that the broken oath would help him defeat Morgan. After all, as an Ascended, she had a much more powerful soul. All he wanted was a second of respite. Morgan suddenly slowed down, allowing him to disengage and take several steps back. For a moment, there was a slight grimace on her face, but it was quickly replaced by the same relaxed, amused smile. She remarked that it was a nice trick. Sunny bent slightly and vomited a mouthful of blood, thin streams of crimson flowing through the fangs of the black mask. The sight of it was both frightening and striking. When he straightened, something about him changed. Well, of course it did. He had commanded two shadows resting on the autumn lead to wrap themselves around his body after all. Instantly, his strength, speed, and resilience tripled. Sunny had not wanted to augment himself before. But faced with the devastating onslaught of the terrifying battle master, he had no other choice. If he wished to learn anything from this fight, he had to make it last more than just a few seconds. Morgan noticed the subtle shift in his posture and tilted her head slightly. Her smile suddenly widened. She said that was good, that this was much better. Sunny dismissed the broken oath, but before the charm even had time to disappear, the young woman was already upon him once again in a whirlwind of ruthless steel. However, this time, things were different. Or rather, slightly different. He gasped out a shocked demand of what the actual hell was happening. Sunny was still hopelessly outmatched, barely managing to survive under the merciless barrage of lightning-fast, cruel attacks. Previously, he had judged that his peak physical might would be on par with a newly ascended master. Even though Sunny wasn't currently using the third shadow, it had to remain on the ground to keep his secrets. The gap between Morgan and him was not supposed to remain that vast. But there was a mistake in his reasoning. He had compared himself to an average master. However, Morgan of Valor was not average in any way. She hailed from one of the three great clans and was possibly even a member of its core family. Among the awakened, she was a being at the absolute apex of might. He urged himself on with a desperate cry to come on. And yet, he was able to do something now at least. Even though Morgan was still dominating the fight and delivering one devastating blow after another, Sunny could perceive her movements and react. He dodged one strike, then deflected another. A third one still connected with his elbow, sending a blinding flash of pain through his body, but it was already an incredible achievement. Morgan seemed pleased by this new development. Her crimson lips curved, revealing pearly white teeth. She called out that he was finally fighting, that he was supposed to be a genius, and urged him to show her to come on and fight. Sunny gritted his teeth and fought, barely staying alive. No matter how much he pushed himself, how much he struggled to keep up with the fearsome master, all he could achieve was not being instantly obliterated. But that was it. Even with two shadows augmenting his body, Sunny saw no hope of winning. Despite the fact that Morgan was holding back her strength, she was simply a monster. No, she was something much more terrible. He had faced and killed many monsters, many demons, and many devils, but none of them could compare to this beautiful, horrifying young woman. However, even if he was going to lose, it was all not in vain. With every blow he suffered, every strike he somehow defended against, Sunny was learning. Morgan's battle style was too elevated for him to grasp. But every glimpse of it he saw was fueling something inside of him. It was as though he had laid a solid foundation by absorbing numerous styles, and now they were being forged into something different, something whole by the insane pressure fighting this monstrous creature exerted on him. His body felt as though it was on the verge of breaking apart, and his vision was slowly becoming blurred, but Sunny felt. He felt as though he was on the verge of a revelation. And when it came, it was as though a floodgate was opened in his mind. Suddenly, all the disparate fragments of knowledge he had absorbed formed into a cohesive tapestry, allowing him to see the shared logic between the various styles he had learned. He was able to perceive these styles from a new perspective, understanding not only their purpose, but also much of the reasoning behind each technique and movement much deeper. He exclaimed that this was it. And due to this new level of insight, Sunny was also able to see a flaw in Morgan's assault, her one and only weakness. Yes, the young woman herself was too powerful and skilled for him to destroy, but her sword, that was a different matter. It was just a dormant memory after all. Instantly, a plan formed in his mind. As time seemed to slow down, Sunny deflected another blow, shifted his body slightly, and then suddenly took a step toward the flashing sword, catching its blade between his left arm and his torso, and then bringing his right fist on it. He put all of his strength behind it, increasing the weight of his gauntlet as much as he could at the last moment, all his muscles strained on the verge of exploding. After numerous clashes against the adamantine surface of the mantle of the underworld, the sword was weakened already. So when his fist connected with it, the steel blade simply shattered, exploding into numerous sharp splinters. He growled that he had her, burning with dark excitement. Sunny continued his movement, aiming to bring the soul serpent down on now defenseless Morgan before she had time to process what had happened and adjust. But before he could, terrible pain suddenly exploded in his chest, and all strength left his hands. The hilt of the odachi slid from his fingers, and the dark sword silently fell to the ground. Sunny swayed and then looked down in confusion. He whispered a stunned question about what had just happened. What he saw didn't make any sense. Morgan's pale, slender hand was protruding from his armor, blood streaming down the smooth onyx surface. She had pierced the mantle of the underworld with her bare hand, her fingers plunging through flesh and bone to tear his heart apart. Sunny had made a mistake. He stammered out a broken disbelief about how this was possible, about ascended memory, 6th tier. He looked up, darkness shrouding his vision. He breathed out a quiet question, wondering if this was what it felt like to die. Everything was dark, and all he could see now were two beautiful vermilion eyes, staring at him with regret and disappointment. Morgan sighed. She said 36 seconds and told him he had fought well. The last thing Sunny felt before slipping into nothingness was a spark of energy traveling from her hand into his body. And then he found himself in the black void of the dreamscape. His pain disappeared, as did his wounds. He felt healthy and whole. The duel was over. As he stared into the darkness, the spell whispered quietly,
"You have received a memory."
But he didn't react, looking into the void with a heavy frown on his face. Somewhere above, near the set of images representing different arenas, a string of words floated. The runes read Mongrel, victories 923, defeats 1. Sunny shut down the illusion. The underground dojo was silent and submerged in darkness, almost like the lightless expanse of his soul. Crawling out of the dreamscape pod, he glanced at it and then walked to the middle of the hall. There, he sat down on the cold ceramic plates of the floor, crossed his legs, and closed his eyes. Back in the illusory world created by the will of an eccentric saint, the tournament was coming to an end. There were spectacles, festivities, and accolades being given to the winners, but he didn't care. He didn't care about the legend of Mongrel either. Sunny had no doubt that his inexplicable refusal of the final reward and daring challenge had created quite a stir. Were people praising Mongrel for his resolve and ambition, or mocking his defeat and calling him a fool? In any case, the network must have been boiling right now. Sunny couldn't be bothered to check. He had much more important concerns. There was the final reward he had received, given to him by Morgan of Valor despite his failure, as well as previous rewards he had no time to study well. And there was Shadow Dance. This was what he had to concentrate on now. Sitting in the darkness with his eyes closed, Sunny thought back to the revelation he had received during the battle with the monstrous master and started to slowly digest it. He had the key now. All that remained was to absorb it. Turn it from a fleeting feeling into an inseparable part of his mind, body, and soul. That was going to take some time. Fragments of Morgan's battle will help him find unity in the discordant collection of battle styles he had amassed. His comprehension of the fundamental, governing principles of battle techniques was vastly elevated, allowing him to understand them on a deeper level. This enlightenment was going to help Sunny grasp various styles much faster, as well as mirror more complex and sophisticated battle arts with ease. At this level, he needed to be able to recognize patterns of essence control from how the enemies moved, breathed, and attacked. The new understanding was going to help with that too. He just had to assimilate it all. Time slowly passed. Sunny continued to meditate, making slow progress toward his goal. After a while, his thought began to wander. The dream tournament gave Sunny much more than he had expected. Yes, There were powerful memories and a breakthrough in his comprehension of shadow dance, but there was also something else, different, but no less valuable. Fighting the best of the best that the Dreamscape had to offer had helped him to put his own prowess into perspective. Facing formidable champions one after another showed Sunny just how much more powerful and experienced than them he was. Sunny was always comparing himself to Nephi's, and inevitably finding himself falling short. He chased after her with desperate resolve, but was never able to catch up. Mongrel might have been only defeated once, but Sunny had been defeated countless times. He lived in the shadow of constant failure, but it was exactly because he had been chasing after changing star without rest that he had left everyone else in the dust without even noticing. Now that he had a chance to look back, Sunny finally saw just how wide the gap between himself and all the rest of the awakened had become. It was so wide that he had been able to cut the best of them down while barely using a quarter of his power. Back on the Forgotten Shore, Sunny had learned a simple truth. If one wanted to better themselves, they had to challenge those who were stronger than them. Nothing was more beneficial to one's growth than fighting against a superior opponent. That was why and how he had transformed himself into a lethal killer in the span of a single year, and even though Sunny had not understood it before. Using Nephi's as a reference point achieved the same result. Even if the goal of surpassing her often seemed bitterly unattainable, he had come far by struggling to do so against all odds. So far, he saw it clearly now. But he also saw how much further he had to walk. Just as fighting the participants of the Dream Tournament had shown him his strength, fighting Morgan had shown him his weakness. Yes, Sunny was incredibly powerful for an awakened of his age. But there were other giants out there, no less terrifying than him. They were older, stronger, and had years of battle experience and vast resources that he lacked. In front of them, Sunny was like an ant. A subtle smile appeared on his face. He murmured to himself that maybe he was more like a cockroach. Morgan was a master of the great clan valor, and as such, she was a peak existence among those below the level of a saint. She was kin to one of the sovereigns, so he could use her as a benchmark to know what was the worst he could expect. Another reference point to strive for, one more superior opponent to temper himself against. One day in the future, they might have to cross swords again. And when that happened, he knew that her vermilion eyes would not end up full of disappointment again. Instead, they would be full of fear. All these thoughts traveled idly at the edges of his consciousness, while most of his mind was occupied by absorbing the key to the second step of shadow dance. And just as that last thought disappeared, he finally felt that the process was complete. A moment later, the silence of the underground dojo was suddenly destroyed by the voice of the spell. Sunny flinched. Not accustomed to hearing it in the real world, let alone inside his home, the spell said,
Your aspect legacy mastery level has increased. You have received the right to claim a legacy relic. Your shadow has evolved.
Sunny waited for a few moments and then hurriedly stood up while summoning the runes. This was it, the moment he had been waiting for. After so much time, all the sweat and blood his effort had finally paid off. He had made another step toward becoming a true battle master. All it took was. Sunny thought for a second, then glanced at the runes describing the mantle of the underworld first. Under the description of the Prince of the Underworld enchantment, a runic counter glowed. Vanquished foes, 2332 6000. All it took was killing 1,200 enemies with his own 2 hands, and dying by a master's hand once. Around 900 of those kills had happened in the Dreamscape, 1 in the waking world and the rest in the wild reaches of the Chained Isles. Sadly, creatures slain by Saint did not count toward the requirement of the strange enchantment, or the number would have been any higher. Still, it was good progress. Turning away. Sunny found the string of runes he wanted to see the most. Shadow's Marble Saint, Soul Serpent. He concentrated on the latter and read. Shadow, Soul Serpent. Shadow rank, awakened. A wide grin appeared on his face. Sunny closed his eyes and listened to his soul, then circulated shadow essence through the coils of the serpent. He could feel that it was flowing even faster than before. The rate of essence expenditure and regeneration was also improved. He breathed out a single satisfied word, perfect. He had expected the process of evolving to a new rank to take a long time, like it had happened with Saint Back on the Forgotten Shore. But Soul Serpent had awakened instantly after he had reached the second level of mastery over the Shadow Dance, maybe due to its unique nature as an aspect legacy relic. He wondered aloud what else had changed. Sunny opened his eyes and looked back to the runes. He had already noticed that there were new ones in the description of the shadow. Shadow attributes, Shadow Guide, Soul Weapon, Soul Beast. The Soul Beast wasn't there before. He concentrated on the new attribute and read.
Attribute description: Soul Serpent can assume the form of a beast.
Sunny blinked a couple of times. He muttered a bewildered question about what that meant. He looked down at his bare chest and stared at the intricate tattoo of a black serpent that coiled around his torso and arms. Then, Sunny carefully raised one hand and gave the shadow a mental command. Immediately, the tattoo moved, slithering onto his palm and moving down his fingers. However, instead of the tip of a sharp blade, a triangular head of a massive snake appeared in the air instead. Enveloped in streaming darkness, the serpent crawled forward, leaving his skin and manifesting itself into existence. Its jet-black scales rustled quietly as they touched the armored plates of the floor, and soon, petrified Sunny was looking at a giant snake, at least 6 meters in length, its body as wide as a large man's arm and strong enough to crush granite into dust. The Stygian creature coiled its long body and stretched into the air. Its head slowly rising and soon reaching as high as Sunny was tall. A forked tongue flashed for a moment, and then the serpent looked him right in the eyes. Then it opened its maw and hissed, revealing long, terrifying onyx fangs. Sunny gulped. The serpent's eyes were as black as its mighty body and shone with dark radiance. They seemed as deep as the lightless expanse of an ocean of shadows and were full of strange, alien intelligence. Luckily, there was no aggression or ill will in them. Instead, there was simply recognition. The shadow serpent was greeting its master. Sunny slowly looked away and studied the dark creature's body. Then he sent the creepy shadow forward, and it swiftly wrapped itself around the serpent. Immediately, flowing patterns that were somehow even darker than the lusterless, obsidian scales revealed themselves, and the pressure that the shadow beast exerted instantly became much, much more frightening. Its body had turned ghostly, enveloped in wisps of impenetrable, moving darkness. Sunny hesitated for a moment and then grinned. He remarked that it was quite a good buy. Very satisfied, he glanced at the giant snake and then patted it on the head with a delighted expression on his face. Now it was the mighty beast's turn to blink. If it had any eyelids. Was Sunny imagining things, or did the obsidian serpent seem a bit startled by such treatment? With a shrug, he glanced back at the runes and lowered his gaze. There was one last surprise left for him to discover. At the very bottom, several new runes appeared. Shadow abilities, Serpentine Steel Soul Reaver. Soul Reaver ability description. A portion of the soul essence of those slain by the shadow serpent in its soul weapon or soul beast form is absorbed and transferred to its master. His smile widened. He added that it was excellent, and that it would help with the fact that he couldn't use the serpent to regenerate essence while it was not on his body. In fact, as long as it continued to kill something, his essence might never run dry. He glanced at the shadow with gleaming eyes. He promised that the two of them were going to do great things together, and that it would have plenty of tasty souls to eat, so it shouldn't worry. Saying that, Sunny opened his palm and commanded the serpent to crawl back onto his skin. A few seconds later, the shadow had already turned back into a tattoo and coiled itself around his body. It was as though there had never been a terrifying creature in the underground dojo in the first place. He murmured that they should take a look at that relic now. Sunny looked at the runes and found the right cluster. Aspect Legacy Shadow Dance. Shadow Dance Mastery Level 2-7. First relic claimed. Second relic claim. Third relic unearned. Concentrating on the second relic, Sunny said confidently and declared his claim. For a second, nothing happened. Sunny waited, full of anticipation. He wondered what it could be: another shadow, a weapon, an armor, maybe a charm or a tool or something more unexpected, a new attribute perhaps. And then, answering his call, the spell spoke from the darkness.
You have claimed an Aspect Legacy relic. You have received a memory.
Sunny hurriedly glanced at the runes describing his memories, searching for a new one. A moment later, when he saw it, his heart skipped a beat, and he momentarily forgot how to breathe. Out there in the darkness of the underground dojo, several familiar runes shone with ethereal light. They read, "Memory, drop of ichor." Sunny held his breath, staring at the runes intensely. He knew what that memory was, another drop of divine blood. And knowing where the shadow slave aspect had come from and to which deity it was connected, it wasn't hard to guess whose blood it was, Shadow God. This memory was of a drop of Shadow God's blood, and in that drop was his lineage. He whispered that it couldn't be, but it was. Sunny had just received a second lineage memory. More than that, that lineage was a complete one, like the fire that Neph had inherited from Sun God. Not a fragment of a forbidden bloodline that he had inherited from Weaver, the demon of fate. Sunny studied the runes for a while, then slowly turned away. He wasn't ready to summon the drop of ichor yet, not because of the pain that consuming a lineage memory would bring. Who knew, maybe there wasn't going to be any this time. After all, this one was not forbidden. He simply had to prepare himself mentally. Sunny paced for a bit, then sat down and meditated for some time. Then, he decided to study the memories he had received in the tournament to distract himself. He had already studied the memory of ice in detail, so 3 more remained. The arrow, the shield, and the final reward he had received from Morgan. The memory created in the forge of the great clan Valor. The real reason he had joined the dream tournament in the first place. Sunny hesitated for a moment, then looked at the list of his memories. Memories: Silver Bell, Puppeteer's Shroud, Midnight Shard. Ordinary Rock, Prowling Thorn, Endless Spring, Blood Blossom, Dark Wing, Moonlight Shard, Mantle of the Underworld, Weaver's Mask, Broken Oath, Blackhorn Bow, Full Quiver, Autumn Leaf, Cruel Sight, Covetous Coffer, Undying Chain, Heavenly Burden, Memory of Fire, Memory of Ice, Strike of Thunder, Patient Avenger, Morgan's Warbow, Drop of Ichor. He muttered that it was a bow, but wondered what was up with that name. Well, it made sense actually. If this was really a custom memory created for a specific user, then why wouldn't its name fit theirs? Sunny concentrated on the arrow first. Memory, Strike of Thunder. Memory rank, Ascended. Memory tier 2. Memory type, Weapon. Memory description: a powerful spirit was once trapped in a glass bottle for 1,000 years. This lightning is a manifestation of his rage. Memory enchantments: Caged Lightning. Enchantment description: this arrow strikes as fast as a bolt of lightning and chains its devastating damage to several nearby creatures. He grunted. He mused that it was lightning in a bottle. Even though the arrow's single enchantment was an active one and required a lot of essence to access, which meant that it couldn't be used often, the effect was very good. It was able to deal damage to groups of enemies, which could come in handy in many situations. Satisfied, he shifted his gaze to the shield. Memory, Patient Avenger. Memory rank, Ascended. Memory tier 3. Memory type, Weapon. Memory description: a flame with hatred. She waited and watched. When the time came, her vengeance was colder than ice. Memory enchantments: Tenacious. Burning Heart, Cold Steel. Tenacious enchantment description: this shield is especially durable. Burning Heart enchantment description: this shield can store a portion of fire damage it receives to augment another weapon of its wielder or unleash a devastating shockwave. Cold Steel enchantment description: this shield can store a portion of impact damage it receives to augment another weapon of its wielder or unleash an immolating wave of fire. Sunny let out a low whistle. Sunny thought for a bit. So, this shield was basically able to convert heat to kinetic energy and vice versa. The stored energy could be used to enhance another weapon or released all at once to deliver a powerful attack, which meant that the more hits the shield received, the more devastating the resulting retaliation would be. Saint was long overdue for a good shield memory, and this one would suit her very well. A weak smile appeared on his face. He murmured that it was time to look at the main prize. He sighed, then concentrated on the bow he had received from Ascended Morgan of Clan Valor. He also summoned it. A composite bow made out of black horn and dark polished wood manifested itself from a storm of crimson sparks. It was entirely black. However, its string was of a vibrant scarlet color. There was also a brand carved into one of its limbs near the grip, its contour of the same color as the string. It depicted the crest of the Valor family, a straight sword thrust through an iron anvil. The bow was quite beautiful, but more importantly, it radiated a feeling of immense power. Sunny admired the weapon for a few moments and then turned back to the runes. Memory Morgan's Warbow. Memory rank ascended. Memory tier 4. Memory type weapon. Memory description: death is worth living for, love is worth waiting for. He observed that it was romantic and morbid. Sunny didn't know who created this description, the spell itself or the person who had forged the bow. If it was the latter, then maybe this was a message to Morgan or a lesson the spellsmith wanted to impart to her. But what kind of a lesson was that? Curious, Sunny looked beneath the surface of the black bow, wishing to see if the spellweave of a memory created by a human was different from that created by the spell. However, it seemed pretty much the same, vast, inconceivably complex, and eerily beautiful. In any case, he was excited to see that this memory was of the 4th tier. It was powerful indeed, no less powerful than the cruel sight. Encouraged, he continued to read the runes. Memory enchantments, soul arrows, unbending. Burden of peace, death dealer. He noted that there were 4 enchantments, the first 2 passive, the other 2 active. Not bad. He concentrated on the first enchantment. Soul arrows enchantment description. This bow attunes to the soul of its wielder and is capable of creating arrows that share its affinity. Unbending enchantments description. This adamantine bow demands a giant's might to be bent. Because of that, arrows shot from it travel as far as the eye can see, and strike with terrible strength, piercing both armor and flesh. The passive enchantments were not bad, to say the least. Sunny wasn't sure what arrows that shared the affinity of his soul could do, but the fact that the bow itself could produce an unlimited amount of arrows was already a great boon. It basically made the full quiver, his previous arrow-type memory, pale in comparison and completely redundant. Each of the soul arrows would also share the tier and rank of the warbow that created them, which was simply incredible. To test it, Sunny grabbed the sting and tried to draw the warbow. Even with all his strength, Sunny was only able to do it after augmenting himself with 2 shadows. As soon as the string moved, a black arrow that looked as though it was made out of solidified shadows suddenly appeared on it. Sunny released the string, and in the next moment, one of the armored plates on the opposite wall exploded. He cursed sharply. He stared at the broken plate dejectedly, then sighed and looked back to the runes. Burden of peace enchantment description. After soul arrows pierce the flesh of an enemy, their weight can be drastically increased. He murmured that it was interesting. Sunny could already think of several useful applications for this enchantment, be it to make wounds dealt by the arrows more severe or simply to slow the enemy down. There was one last string of runes left. Death Dealer enchantment description. This bow is able to consume a large amount of essence to deliver an obliterating strike. That sounded ominous. Sunny was curious to know how obliterating exactly that strike was supposed to be, but he was not going to test it in his dojo. It already suffered enough. Morgan's warbow was indeed a weapon worthy of an ascended knight from a great clan. It was a truly formidable and versatile weapon. In any other circumstance, Sunny would have been mad from joy after receiving it, and he was, sort of. But there was one more memory he had to deal with. It was time. He couldn't postpone it anymore. Sunny glanced at the beautiful bow for the last time, then sighed and dismissed it. As soon as the flood of scarlet sparks disappeared, he summoned the drop of ichor. The underground dojo was submerged in darkness, and as soon as Sunny willed the drop of ichor to manifest itself into reality, that darkness suddenly came to life. Countless shadows moved and danced around him, forming an invisible whirlpool. Their movements were strange and erratic, fraught with anticipation, excitement, and longing. Slowly, golden sparks of light appeared in the air in front of him and then shot toward a single point in space, coalescing into a small, radiant dot. However, the memory did not appear yet. Instead, more and more sparks flew into it, thousands upon thousands of them, until at last, it seemed as though wide streams of brilliant golden light were constantly flowing into the slowly growing sphere of radiance. This continued for almost an entire minute, and when the sparks finally disappeared, A brilliant drop of golden liquid was floating in the air in front of Sunny. It was suffused with a beautiful light that didn't seem blinding. It was somehow able to illuminate the entire expanse of the dojo. However, there was also something dark about the shining drop of divine blood, contrasted against its golden radiance. The shadows around him were now suddenly much deeper, darker, and starkly pronounced. All their movement ceased, as though they were frozen still by awe and reverence. He muttered that was Shadow God's blood, all right. Sunny forced himself to look away from the drop of ichor and summoned the runes describing it. He had to make sure that his guess was right. Tense with anticipation, he read, "Memory drop of ichor, memory rank unknown. Memory tier unknown. Memory type unknown." He murmured that it was just like the last time. Not surprised, he lowered his gaze and studied the string of runes that were his real goal.
Memory description: before there was only boundless eternal void. From that dark abyss the unknown were born. Just like chaos itself, they were endless and everlasting, vast and forever changing. But then came desire, and with it came direction. From it the gods were born. When gods appeared, the void was not eternal anymore. When gods appeared, the darkness was not endless anymore. When gods appeared, the chaos was not orderless anymore. The gods appeared, and brought with them war. This drop of divine blood was spilled by Shadow on one of the battlefields of that war, before the void was bound.
Sunny stared at the runes, flabbergasted. That was a lot to take in. He mused that unlike the unknown were indeed a type of creatures, primordial beings that existed before time, space, and even death itself in a boundless dark void. And the gods were different from them, but also their kin. At least it was clear now what terrible enemy the gods had faced long before the demons and their rebellion, and why Shadow God had been compelled to create death. How else would they be able to defeat eternal creatures? Were time, space, and other concepts Sunny had always thought to be absolute also created as weapons in the war of the gods against the unknown? At least it was easy to tell which side had emerged victorious. However, the most frightening detail was that the description never said that the primordial void had been destroyed, only that it had been bound. Was it still bound, now that the gods were dead? Sunny shivered and shook his head. The short description contained a vast amount of information which had an even vaster amount of implications. He couldn't encompass all that in a small span of time. He ventured that maybe after he consumed the drop, he would learn more. He hesitated, then glanced at the radiant drop of golden liquid once again. Immediately, the spell spoke. This time, however, its voice did not sound subtly excited. He muttered that it was weird.
"You have acquired a drop of ichor. Do you wish to consume it?"
Sunny sighed, remembering the agony of the previous 2 times he had decided to snack on a piece of divinity. Then, he gritted his teeth and said yes.
"Oh, so be it."
Sunny started to ask what that was supposed to mean, but the golden drop suddenly separated into 3 equal parts, which then shot toward his chest, abdomen, and head. The radiant droplets entered his 3 shadow cores and disappeared, dissolving into the darkness of his soul. Sunny flinched. He stammered out a shocked question already. The shadows surrounding him exploded with motion, and at the same time, the darkness inside of him seethed. He felt something entering his bloodstream, a cold and unfamiliar energy that brought with it both pain and euphoria. He gasped that this was it was starting. He lowered himself to the floor, preparing for the torturous process of transformation. The cold energy spread through his entire body, reaching every corner of it. It surged, on the cusp of assimilating into the very essence of his being. And then something strange happened. Sunny opened his eyes wide in shock and horror. As the lineage of Shadow God flowed through his veins, blood weave suddenly surged too, but its behavior was not at all normal or caused by Sunny himself. It was acting of its own volition and felt full of ominous, dark intent and hunger. He demanded to know what was happening. He was prepared for indescribable pain, but the pain never came. Instead, he could feel the cold energy being hungrily and ruthlessly devoured by the blood weave, like it had been starving for thousands of years. He cried out, demanding to know what the hell was happening. A sudden spasm ran through his body, and Sunny fell down with a short yelp. Inside of him, two forces were fighting for control over his very being. One was the lineage of Shadow God, and the other was blood weave. And despite the fact that one was complete and came from an actual divinity, while the other was fragmented and incomplete, the forbidden inheritance of Weaver was winning. It was like a savage beast that sunk its teeth into the soft flesh of its prey and refused to let go. He shouted at it to stop, demanding to know what it was doing. And before he knew it, it was all over. The cold energy of Shadow God's lineage was gone, and Blood Weave was back to its usual self, peaceful once again, as though nothing had happened. Peaceful, but yet stronger. As Sunny stared into the darkness in absolute shock, there was no announcement of him acquiring a new attribute. Instead, the spell said with a hint of dark satisfaction in its voice,
Blood Weave has evolved. Bone Weave has evolved. Ember of Divinity has evolved. Your memory has been destroyed.
Sunny remained silent for a long time, and then let out a furious, outraged scream, roaring Weaver's name and calling him a bastard. The autumn was in full swing. Out in the waking world, the skies were gray and the winds were turning cold. The trees were showering the wet ground with a fragrant carpet of dead leaves, but under the boundless, lethal expanse of the sky above, the world was still warm and bright. On an especially large island, one covered with emerald grass and moss-covered ruins, a frightening nightmare creature was stalking its prey. It had 4 mighty paws, a lean body covered in black fur, and a wide maw full of sharp fangs. Above it, 2 furious red eyes burned with hatred and madness. The abomination noiselessly moved through the tall grass, approaching the source of loud noise. A human's voice was screaming, full of indignation, bellowing that he was right here, daring the damned bastards to come and get him, cursing them all. The creature snarled and prepared to jump. Before it could, however, a slender arrow fell from the sky and hit the abomination right in the eye, instantly killing it.
You have slain a fallen beast, Black Ravager. Your shadow grows stronger.
Several hundred meters away, safely hidden in the shadows cast by a fragment of an ancient wall, Sunny lowered his bow and frowned. The happy shadow jumped up and down several times, then turned to him and applauded. Sunny looked at it, his frown turning into a scowl. He snapped at the shadow, demanding to know what it meant by great shot, since he had been aiming for its leg, and called it an idiot. Dejectedly shaking his head, he threw the bow on the ground and growled. It had been almost 2 months since the day he had gained, and promptly lost, the lineage of Shadow God, but his mood was still in shambles. He had spent most of this time training Rain and learning how to use a bow. By now, his aim wasn't terrible, but it was also not nearly as impressive as what he had seen Kai do. The fact that his archery was improving so slowly only added to his frustration. He wasn't using Morgan's warbow, of course. Reluctant to be seen with a memory awarded to Mongrel, even if no one except for the terrifying master knew what exactly that memory was, people could recognize the brand of clan valor on its surface, which would lead to a lot of questions. Instead, Sunny was training with the Blackhorn bow, which Saint had used to wield back when he had been too weak to handle nightmare creatures populating the chained isles without her support. Sunny stared at the bow in question and suppressed the desire to give it a good kick. Dismissing it with a sigh, he retrieved the cruel sight from where it had been thrust into the ground and headed in the direction of the slain abomination. Compared to when he had just arrived on the chained isles, Sunny was much stronger now. He had a vastly better arsenal of memories at his disposal, an additional shadow core and a third shad. And his combat mastery was polished by hundreds upon hundreds of bloody battles. Additionally, after the damned and forbidden, rightfully so, lineage of Weaver had swallowed the drop of Shadow God's blood, 3 of his attributes evolved. The Ember of Divinity was now Flame of Divinity, rising his divine affinity even more, which also increased the durability of the undying chain. Blood Weave and Bone Weave had not changed in name, but became much more potent. Sunny was now much harder to break and kill. He probably couldn't bleed to death even if he wanted to, and it would take a saint, or someone like Master Morgan, to shatter his bones again. That was something, at least. Commanding the ordinary rock to shut up, he picked it up from the ground, hid it on his belt, and walked over to the carcass of the Black Ravager. The creepy shadow slowly turned its head and stared at the carcass with disturbing fascination. He muttered about that guy. Sonny rolled his eyes. He grumbled at the shadow not to just stand there, calling it a pervert, and told it to come and help. The shadow eagerly wrapped itself around the blade of the prowling thorn, which was then used to cut the tough hide of the dead nightmare creature. Sonny swiftly fished out the soul shard and threw it to the covetous coffer, which hopped into the air and swallowed it with a metallic click. Usually, that would be it, but today Sonny needed to retrieve something else as well. Grimacing from time to time, he cut several large slabs of meat off the carcass, wrapped them, and threw the bundle over his shoulder. He muttered that it should be enough, finally done with the gruesome task. He stood up, picked up the cruel sight, and headed toward the southern edge of the large island. This island was a bit special, and for a good reason. Once Sonny reached its end, he saw a breathtaking sight. Far away and below him, the scattering of floating isles was no more. Instead, solid ground stretched as far as the eye could see, covered by a patchwork of forests, meadows, marshes, rolling hills, and glistening ribbons of rushing rivers. A dark, bottomless abyss stretched between the edge of the island and the rest of the dream realm, and those rivers fell into it, creating grandiose waterfalls. Near to where he stood, a ruined fortress rose from the ground, and from its gates, a colossal iron chain, many times thicker than the giant chains connecting the isles together, extended into the abyss, connecting to the soil on the other side of the dark chasm. This was one of the anchors of the chained isles, and the road by which Awakened traveled here from the lands to the south, which belonged to the great clan Valor. As much as anything could belong to humans in this realm of nightmares. Sonny glanced at the sun, then got busy making a fire. By the time strips of meat were roasting over the coals, two figures finally appeared on the colossal chain. A small smile appeared on his face, one of the few sincere ones he had shown in the past 2 months. Effie and Kai had finally reached the chained isles. Now, all of them were here. Effie and Kai climbed over the rubble of the shattered gateway and entered the crumbled fortress. Both were tired and covered in layers of dirt, their armors dented and their weapons nicked. The travel to the very edge of the explored lands had not been easy. Even though they had made stops and rested at human citadels along the way, it took a lot of strength, endurance, resolve, and a bit of luck to reach the chained isles alive. However, both raised by wolves and Nightingale were calm and vigilant. Their eyes sharp, their hands steady. They were ready to face any danger. Luckily, there were no enemies inside the ruin. Instead, several nightmare creatures lay dead on the ground, some of them cut to pieces, some strangely lacking any wounds but utterly broken, as though something terrifyingly powerful had crushed their bodies with inhuman strength. The shadows suddenly moved, and a split second later, Kai already had his bow drawn. However, Effie gestured for him to lower it. Out of the shadows, a tall and graceful figure in elaborate black armor stepped out, 2 ruby flames shining behind the visor of her helmet. In one hand, she wielded a steadfast kite shield forged out of dull steel, and in the other, an austere sword, its blade still dripping with rancid blood of the slaughtered abominations. Kai cautiously studied the menacing creature.
Is that Sonny's echo? She looks different.
Effie grinned and agreed that the echo did look different, then called out a cheerful greeting to the beautiful demon and asked where her sneaky boyfriend was, correcting herself to say master. The taciturn demon tilted her head a little, stared at Effie for a few moments, then silently turned around and walked away. Kai offered quietly that they should probably follow her. The 3 of them left the crumbling fortress and walked along the edge of the island. Soon, the heavenly smell of roasting meat reached their nostrils. A few seconds later, both Effie and Kai froze, their mouths hanging open. A fire pit was built in the shadow of an ancient wall, strips of juicy, generously seasoned meat roasting over the coals. But that was not all. There were also fresh vegetables and succulent fruits, a copper sieve producing the unmistakable smell of freshly brewed coffee, and a few more things that people very rarely saw in the dream realm. The person responsible for all this revelry was sitting in a comfortable folding chair, lazily enjoying a slice of melon. When he saw them, an impish smile appeared on his face. Sunny called out a cheerful greeting, telling them they had finally made it. With that, the young man jumped out of the chair, reached into a pot full of ice, and then placed 2 frosty bottles of cold, expensive beer into their hands. Sunny grinned and welcomed them to the chained aisles. Some time later, Effie and Kai had satiated their hunger and were resting with dreamy expressions on their faces. Sunny had given up his folding chair and was now sitting on the ground. He was inwardly lamenting the fact that covetous coffer was not large enough on the inside to fit several. At least not yet. Maybe after he becomes a master, things would be different. Kai took a sip of his beer and glanced at the branded bottle in his hand with a funny expression.
Sunny, how do you even have all this stuff? Are you on such good terms with the White Feather clan?
Sunny laughed.
Nope, I delivered all these things here myself. What, you have forgotten about my brilliant emporium already? It seems that Aiko had not hounded you for an endorsement hard enough, or maybe too hard and you're suffering from trauma-induced amnesia. I mean, you are basically a co-founder. The first deal I ever made was with your help, remember?
Kai smiled and admitted that he did remember those terrible memories Sunny had asked him to buy on his behalf in the castle. Sunny nodded with enthusiasm.
My operation might seem small compared to what you two have seen in Bastion, but here on the Chained Island, I am the most successful entrepreneur. I guess it's true what they say about business. You know, you have to find the right people in the right wells, or something like that.
The charming archer blinked a couple of times, but didn't comment. Effie, on the other hand, did. Finishing her beer, she glanced at the empty bottle with regret and sighed.
Sunny, I have a serious question. Think about it before answering. Take your time too. Will you marry me? No, seriously. I am reformed. I swear I won't tease you anymore. I won't even mind you having a girlfriend. Just continue supplying me with all this stuff.
He sneered. Sunny retorted with a flat no, denied the proposal, and called her a shameless gold digger. Effie made a disappointed face, then threw her head back and laughed out loud, accepting the rejection with good humor. Then she grew a little bit more serious and asked,
So, what's the plan? How do we proceed from here?
Sunny sighed, then took out his map of the Chained Isles and placed it on the grass. Effie and Kai got closer and studied it attentively. He pointed to the southernmost point on the map and said,
We are here, first things first. We need to get you to the sanctuary of Noctis, which is about 3 days of traveling away, and get you anchored there. White Feather Clan patrols this route routinely, so we shouldn't run into anything too troublesome.
Then he pointed at a particular island, marked with an image of a burned tree.
After you are settled, we'll go check up on the firekeepers and their progress on the ship. They won't be finished repairing that thing for at least a month more, from what I've heard, so you'll have to spend that time well. Hunt, saturate your cores as much as you can, search for better equipment.
Effie nodded.
What about you and Cassie? Are you well prepared?
Sunny hesitated, then nodded.
I am reasonably prepared, Cassie, I don't know, but the two of us have another task to accomplish before the ship is ready to set sail.
He pointed to the very north of the Chained Isles, to a dark island that was almost touching the foreboding slopes of the Hollow Mountains.
There is something we need to retrieve from the Night Temple. If all goes well, we'll travel north and come back within a month. If it takes longer, we will rendezvous here.
His finger landed on the shipwreck island.
And then challenge the seed, that's the gist of it. Don't worry, though, we'll talk everything through in detail before Cassie and I leave.
Effie and Kai glanced at each other. Kai agreed that it sounded like a plan. Sunny nodded, then glanced at the setting sun and told them to rest well tonight, since they would set off in the morning. Winter was drawing closer and closer, and the closer it got, the more nervous he became. On the way back to the sanctuary, Sunny tried to impart as much knowledge about the Chained Isles as he could to Kai and Effie. The archer, in particular, needed to go through a tough adjustment. His main combat tool was his ability to fly, which was obviously restricted in this strange land. Looking at the clear blue sky with a bit of trepidation, Kai asked,
"So that crushing, how deadly is it?"
Sunny grimaced.
Deadly enough to kill a saint, but it is also situational. After a bit, you'll develop a sense of how high or low the island you're standing on is. When it is at its lowest point, like right now, you will probably be able to rise several hundred meters into the air before feeling any pressure. The exact margin depends on how long the chains of the island are.
He paused, then continued.
However, when it is ascending or descending, you'd better either stay on the ground or not fly more than a dozen meters up, and if it has already reached the peak, well, you really should have already escaped to another island. But if you failed to do that in time, lay on the ground and pray. If the chains are short enough, you will survive.
Kai studied the sky above some more, then looked down and asked whether he could fly freely below the islands. Sunny nodded.
Theoretically, yes, the sky below is generally safe, there's just nothing there, but that is only true for its depths. The underside of the islands is actually much more dangerous than their surface. The creatures that dwell there are the true horrors of this place. Some of them stay put, some move through the darkness as they hunt and migrate between islands, so flying under the islands is lethal in its own way.
Effie was less concerned with the crushing, since her mighty constitution allowed her to withstand it on par with someone like Master Roan or Sunny himself. She was, however, very interested in all the kinds of nightmare creatures that populated the region. The huntress was determined to finish saturating her core in the month left before their departure. Sunny shared all the knowledge he had about the inhabitants of the Chained Isles. He had spent many months fighting local abominations. So he knew a lot, which creatures frequented which island, how they attacked their prey, what their weaknesses were, and so on. He also knew which islands had to be avoided at all costs. By the end of their journey, even Effie seemed impressed by the amount of knowledge he had accumulated. She admitted that the academy didn't pay him for nothing, and that he really had done a lot of research. Sunny grinned and pointed out that when he hunted nightmare creatures, he got to sell their shards and also got paid by the research faculty. So much money, he added. Wasn't it a dream? She giggled and told him that the wonderful thing about him was that he was very easy to please. Effie, meanwhile, looked east and asked with a bit of tension,
What about the saint who rules this region? What's your opinion of her?
Sunny thought for a bit, then said with uncertainty,
Sky Tide, she is a bit of a recluse, I don't really know, but her husband is a really decent guy, so that earned her some points in my book.
Effie smiled lightly and didn't continue the conversation. On the third day, they finally reached the sanctuary. Due to how high-profile both Raised by Wolves and Nightingale were, the trio was invited to have a meal with Saint Tyrus before visiting the gateway. The dinner was pleasant enough, but when the plates turned empty, the real conversation began. Saint Tyrus looked at Effie and Kai with her usual expressionless severity and asked,
I was surprised to hear that two more of the most brilliant awakened of the new generation had decided to visit my remote and unremarkable citadel. If you forgive my bluntness, to what do I owe the pleasure?
The three of them glanced at each other. They had discussed what to say in advance. At this point, there was no reasonable way to keep their intention secret, so it was easier to just let the cat out of the bag. Kai smiled politely before answering. That smile of his was charming enough to make a crowd of women faint on the spot, but Sky Tide did not even blink.
We came here with the intention of challenging a nightmare seed. Sunny, awakened sunless, discovered one not too long ago. Since the seed is years away from blooming and doesn't pose a threat to the waking world at the moment, he didn't inform you. Please forgive him that transgression.
Master Roan frowned and demanded to know where the seed was on the Chained Isles. Effie pointed down and explained that to reach it, they would have to descend into the depths of the sky below. Song of the Fallen would also be joining them, and they planned to use the ancient ship the Fire Keepers were repairing. Roan blinked a couple of times and remarked that it was extravagant, but at least it explained a few things. Saint Tyrus lingered for a few moments, then asked evenly,
Are you sure that you want to enter a second nightmare? It has been less than a year since the four of you awakened. Most people take much more time to prepare for the rigors of the spell's trial, and even then, many don't survive.
A wild smile appeared on Effie's face.
Sure, yes, I guess we are sure as much as anyone can be. The decision to challenge the seed was not made rashly, nor was it based on blind ambition. You are right, of course, but the circumstance of our awakening was not ordinary. Even though it only happened recently between the four of us, we already share a decade of battle experience, and the battles we fought were not soft.
Sky Tide did not answer immediately, turning her face away to look at the vista of the chained isles. Kai cleared his throat and asked whether she was going to try and dissuade them. Tyrus remained silent for a few moments, then slowly shook her head.
No, if four awakened with the SSA designation want to challenge a nightmare seed, they must know what they're doing. Your timing is actually good as well.
Sunny frowned slightly and wondered what she meant by good timing, but Sky Tide wasn't going to elaborate. Instead, she looked at Effie and asked,
When do you leave?
The huntress shrugged and explained that Cassie and Sunny had an errand to run in the night temple, so they would depart as soon as they returned. Tyrus shifted her gaze to Sunny. Was he imagining things, or did her expression become darker?
You are going to the night temple, Sunless?
He nodded. Sunny replied that yes, it was a part of their preparations, and asked why. The beautiful saint remained silent for a few moments, then said simply,
Be careful to strictly follow the rules while you're there.
Sunny politely agreed. Inwardly, though, he was a bit disturbed, thinking to himself that it had not sounded ominous at all. Cassie, too, had seemed a bit apprehensive about the night temple. Just what kind of a place was it? A few days later, a delicious aroma was slowly spreading through Sunny's home. He was currently in the kitchen area of the first floor, whistling an upbeat tune as his hands juggled several cooking utensils. There were several pans and pots simmering on the stove, and a scattering of fresh ingredients on the countertops around him.
Ah, this smells so good.
Taking a step to the side, he produced a strange knife out of nowhere and started slicing and dicing the vegetables, the triangular blade moving so fast that it turned into a blur. Rain, who was tasked with peeling the potatoes, gave him a long and dark look.
Sunny, not to doubt your honesty and professional integrity, but how exactly is this a part of my training? Are you sure you're not just using me as cheap labor? No, wait. It's not even cheap. I am actually paying you.
Without stopping what he was doing, Sunny looked at her and frowned.
Why, of course, I am very sure. Also, is this how you handle a blade? By gods, you just sliced half of that poor potato off and threw it into the sink. It's called peeling, not destroying, you know. Where's your finesse? Where's your precision? Control that knife better. These things are very expensive.
Rain stared at him with burning resentment for a few moments, then sighed heavily and continued peeling the potatoes. Sunny grinned. Effie, who was watching him cook with a wolfish expression, gulped.
So, it's not ready yet.
His eyes twitched.
40 seconds, damn it. That's how long ago you asked the same question. For 100th time, what do you think changed since then?
Effie opened her mouth to retort, but at that moment, the doorbell rang. A sadistic light suddenly gleamed in Sunny's eyes.
Oh, I wonder who can it be?
He glanced at Rain and said nonchalantly,
Rain, go see who it is.
The teenage girl blew a strand of hair out of her eyes, wiped her hands on her apron, and glared at him.
What, I am your doorman now too?
Grumbling, she put the knife down and went to the door, then opened it. Sunny observed her with keen interest. Rain looked up, revealing that the unexpected visitor was quite tall, and then suddenly froze. Her face paled so much that it turned almost entirely white, and her pupils became as wide as saucers. Her mouth hung open. It was as though the girl was paralyzed by horror. Sunny weighted the heavy kunai in his hand and walked over. As he walked, a strange sound escaped Rain's mouth. Rain stammered, unable to form a word. A tall and ridiculously attractive young man was standing on the porch looking at her with a polite and friendly smile. His hair was auburn and absolutely gorgeous, and his electric green eyes were nothing short of stunning. He was dressed in simple but exquisitely stylish clothes, holding fashionable sunglasses and a face mask in one of his hands.
"Oh, I am so sorry. I must have come to the wrong house."
Even his voice was charming and velvety, causing one's ears to tingle. Rain was finally able to force out a word, her voice a panicked squeal.
"An night."
Sunny gave her a short look, shook his head, then smiled at Kai.
Hi Youngs, you're here. Sorry, the dinner isn't even ready yet. Come on in, come on in.
Kai returned his smile and came inside. Sunny raised a hand and poked Rain in the back, then narrowed his eyes and said with exasperation,
Rain, why are you just standing there? Get my Hyung some slippers quick.
Then he turned to Kai and sighed.
So sorry, that's Rain, a girl I tutor. She is a bit slow sometimes.
Kai glanced at her, two lethally cute dimples appearing on his cheeks.
"I am sure that is not true. It is very nice to meet you, Rain."
She opened her mouth, trying to say something, but no words came out of her mouth. Sunny waited for a couple of moments, then shook his head again and bent down to push a pair of house shoes to Kai.
Make yourself at home. This is the living room. I'll be over there in the kitchen area for a bit, but please, for the love of gods, can you distract Effie? She's driving me crazy.
Kai laughed, patted him on the shoulder, and went in to greet the hungry huntress. Sunny and Rain were momentarily left alone. The teenage girl breathed heavily for a few moments, then slowly looked down at her dirty apron and hands with pieces of potato peel stuck to them. An expression of utter horror appeared on her face. Then, she looked at him with wide eyes and whispered,
"Sunny, why is NNNN? Why is night in your house?"
He blinked a couple of times, pretending to not understand the question.
What do you mean? Kai is a dear friend of mine. We're practically brothers, one might say. What's wrong with you today?
Sunny shook his head in derision. Rain stared at him in shock, then opened her mouth to say something. However, before she could, the doorbell rang again. Sunny calmly opened the door, revealing a petite, exquisitely beautiful young woman standing on the porch. She had delicate features, pale blonde hair, and stunning blue eyes. Despite the fact that the young woman was dressed humbly, there was an aura about her that made it almost impossible to look away. It was as though she was a pristine heavenly creature that had somehow found her way to the dirty, imperfect, mundane world. In her hand, she was holding a long white cane. Cassie hesitated for a moment, then turned her head a little, facing Sunny.
"I hope I am not late."
Rain stared at her with a ghostly expression.
SS Song of the...
Then she turned to Sunny as well, her eyes even wider than before. Poor thing looked as though she was about to faint. Sunny smiled brightly.
Ah, finally, vengeance.
Kai, Effie, and Cassie settled in the living room and chatted while Sunny returned to the kitchen. The two areas were basically a single space, separated only by distance and a tall counter, so he could see them clearly. Watching his friends at ease and happy to be reunited with the blind girl turned his expression dark for a short moment, but Sunny quickly put on a carefree mask. Rain was by his side and staring at them too. Her gaze lingered on Kai for a while, then on Cassie. Finally, she looked at Effie and studied her face with a complicated expression.
Here it comes.
A few moments later, her eyes widened. Sunny didn't think that it was possible for the teenage girl to become paler than she already was, but he was proven wrong. Looking like a ghost, Rain slowly turned to him and whispered.
Effie, she's...
Sunny offered her a polite smile.
Huz, what are you mumbling about?
Then, he glanced into the living room and raised his eyebrows.
Oh, do you want me to call her over? No problem. Hey, F.
Rain waved her hands and pressed one against his mouth.
No, don't.
Sunny stared at her with a silent question in his eyes. The girl looked at him, then at her hand, then awkwardly stepped back.
What I wanted to say was, Effie is she. Sunny grimaced.
Awakened Athena, also known as raised by wolves. What you didn't know.
Rain suddenly swayed and grabbed the counter to balance herself. A comically mortified expression appeared on her face. Really, he couldn't blame her for not recognizing Effie. The girl wasn't that interested in the Awakened to begin with, and the government mostly used the heroic visage of raised by wolves as she looked in the dream realm. Mighty, tall, and brimming with vitality. In their propaganda, it wasn't easy to match that image with the weak, gaunt, and sickly young woman who was bound to a wheelchair. Not to mention that a normal person would never expect to meet a famed hero in their backyard. Still, looking at Rain now was incredibly funny.
But she and I, oh gods, I even said, oh no, oh no.
She lowered her head, then suddenly looked up and pierced Sunny with an unexpectedly furious gaze.
Damn it, Sunny, why are you friends with Raised by Wolves, Nightingale and Song of the Fallen? They are famous people.
He frowned in confusion, then shrugged and said that they used to be members of the same cohort. Rain blinked a couple of times. Her voice became even quieter.
But Song of the Fallen, Raised by Wolves, and Nightingale were members of Lady Changing Star's cohort.
Sunny smiled innocently.
Oh, yup, that's the one.
The girl lifelessly sat down, almost missing the chair. She remained silent for a long time, then asked slowly.
Sunny, you know Lady Nephi's, the Lady Nephi's, Changing Star of the Immortal Flame clan. You're from her cohort.
He grinned and casually confirmed that yes, he knew Neph. Rain closed her eyes. Sunny did not say anything for a bit, then cleared his throat. He waited for a few more moments, then said gently,
So, about those potatoes.
She flinched, looked down at her apron again, then answered weakly.
Oh, sorry, actually I have to go home. I forgot to do homework, sorry.
With that, Rain stood up and rushed to the door. Sunny yelled at her back.
Hey, what homework? It's Saturday.
Without turning around, the teenage girl squealed sorry one more time and fled the house in a panic. Sunny watched as the door closed behind her and laughed. He felt avenged. He felt wonderful.
Ah, priceless. That was priceless. I do wish she would finish peeling the potatoes first, though.
After the dinner, the four of them settled around the table and moved on to the real reason for today's gathering, the discussion of their plan to challenge the Nightmare Seed. This conversation could have taken place in the sanctuary, but despite having a somewhat good relationship with the White Feather clan, Sunny didn't want to say some things aloud in their territory. Their territory was also a sovereign's territory after all. So, the cohort had made plans to meet in the waking world. There was a lot to discuss. The second nightmare was a deadly challenge, and they had to be as prepared to face it as possible. There were also a lot of preparations to be made for the journey to the seed itself. Venturing into the sky below and locating the rift in the ocean of flames that hid in its depths was not an easy task in and of itself. So, they spent many hours going over every little detail, sharing knowledge, and finding solutions to potential problems they could encounter. The nightmare itself was a mystery, of course, so no matter how much they tried to account for every possibility, they still had no way of knowing what awaited them inside. All they knew was that it would be dangerous, deadly, and terrifying. Still, there were things they could do to improve their chances, grow stronger, improve their arsenals, but most importantly, aim for maximum flexibility in the collection of tools at their disposal. After all, it was not the strongest who survived. It was the most adaptable. It was already deep night when the conversation stopped. It seemed as though they had discussed everything they could, at least for now. Sunny made a pot of coffee for everyone, poured it into the cups, and sat down opposite Cassie.
Now that everything else is settled, let's talk about the Night Temple. The more I hear about it, the stranger I feel. Isn't it supposed to be just a private citadel of clan valor? What's the deal with it?
Cassie remained silent for a bit, then took a sip of coffee and sighed.
Night Temple, how do I describe it? It is an eerie place. The first thing you need to know, I guess, is that it's actually situated on the underside of the northern island and not on its surface, in the eternal shadow. That makes it harder to access but also more defendable. I doubt that even an army of nightmare creatures, or awakened for that matter, would be able to take it by force.
She paused and then continued.
At first glance, it's a frontier outpost for the Knights of Valor, a transfer base that was supposed to serve as a staging ground for their push further north during the active expansion of the previous decades. But, as you know, after humans encountered the Hollow Mountains, our progress in that direction stopped. Night Temple remains, though.
Sunny frowned and asked if it was basically empty. Cassie lowered her head. When she spoke, her voice sounded tense.
Logically, it is supposed to be, but it's not.
Cassie chose her next words carefully.
Despite the fact that the Hollow Mountains were designated as a death zone, it seems that Clan Valor still has ambitions of exploring them. Perhaps that is why Night Temple exists, and why a saint is stationed there.
Sunny frowned. Even Kai and Effie seemed to be perplexed.
I thought Sky Tide was the only saint on the Chained Isles.
The blind girl shook her head.
No, there is another, Saint Cormac. He oversees the citadel and ventures into the mist of the Hollow Mountains from time to time, as though searching for something. In fact, that was how I was able to receive permission to anchor myself and my cohort in the Night Temple. In exchange, I was meant to use my aspect to aid him in the exploration, but nothing much came of it.
Sunny thought for a bit, then said,
So far, everything sounds reasonable.
Cassie nodded, then shifted uncomfortably.
Yeah, but there are just too many strange things about that citadel, ones that have nothing to do with the saint and his mission. For one, there are just too many awakened there, around 100, I think. That is much more than is needed to support one saint. However, the most eerie part is not their number, but who those awakened are.
She hesitated, then said somberly,
With the exception of 2 masters who serve as Saint Cormac's lieutenants, all of them are lost.
Sunny perked up. What Cassie had told them was, indeed, strange, and more than a little bit disturbing. There weren't that many lost among the awakened, so why would 100 of them be gathered together in a remote and isolated citadel? But that wasn't the reason why Sunny was suddenly excited. Leaning forward a bit, he asked,
Oh yeah, is there one called Mordred?
Cassie thought for a few moments, then shook her head.
I don't know. We weren't really allowed to interact with the lost while living in the Night Temple. You see, the whole citadel is separated into 3 areas. The outward ring is where we were given a space to establish a base. We were forbidden from entering the temple itself, unless escorted by one of the masters. That is where the lost live and the gateway is situated.
She suddenly fell silent, and then added in a darker tone.
But there is another area inside the temple too, one that even the lost aren't allowed to enter, the inner sanctum. One time, while we were entering the gateway, I felt the doors of the sanctum open and accidentally glimpsed the people guarding it.
The blind girl shivered.
Or at least they seemed like people, but they weren't. They were all echoes, human echoes.
Sunny scowled.
What the hell?
One human echo was creepy enough, but many. What exactly were they guarding that actual humans couldn't? No, that wasn't important. Clan Valor could keep its secrets. He just needed to get the knife from the altar.
So, what about an altar? Have you perceived an ivory knife lying on it?
Cassie lingered for a few moments, then shrugged.
The gateway in the Night Temple is different from the one in the sanctuary. You don't need to touch the altar to activate it, so I've only felt the altar from afar. It is indeed cut from a slab of black stone, from what others told me. There is a statue of a veiled woman holding a star and a bolt of lightning behind it. Other than that, I can't say.
Sunny sighed, a bit disappointed, and said it didn't matter. He was sure the knife was there. The problem was to convince the representatives of Clan Valor to let him approach the altar or even sneak to it when no one was looking. He asked whether she thought she would be able to convince them to let him inside. The blind girl nodded, but there was a bit of uncertainty on her face.
I think there won't be a problem. Although I wasn't able to help Saint Cormac a lot, we parted on good terms. However, that whole place is very mysterious. I am reasonably sure that they will at least allow us to anchor ourselves to the gateway, but...
Sunny didn't like the sound of that and asked what she meant. Cassie sighed.
Performing a ritual over the altar is another matter entirely. They can also simply refuse to let us in. I doubt that this will happen, but just in case, we should be prepared. The day we leave the sanctuary might be the last time we'll have access to a gateway before the second nightmare is over.
Sunny grimaced. Although he hated to admit it, she was right. It was best to prepare for the worst. He had a few things to do in the next few days then.
All right, then we will leave in 2 days. Make your preparations and I will make mine.
Cassie nodded and fell quiet. In that silence, a strange sound could be heard. Sunny turned around and saw Effie noisily devouring the leftovers of their recent dinner. Noticing that he was staring at her, the huntress froze.
Oh, what? You guys were busy and I was hungry.
He covered his eyes for a moment, then shook his head. Sunny muttered something about the woman under his breath. Speaking of preparations, he had to do something right now.
Hey, Kai, come here and give me your hand.
Kai looked at him with a silent question but didn't ask anything. He stood up and walked over, then stretched one hand over with a smile. Sunny put one finger on it and sent 2 memories away with a regretful sigh. The Blackhorn bow and the full quiver. Effie was well equipped with powerful memories from her time on the Forgotten Shore and from the months she had spent hunting as an awakened, but the charming archer lacked good armaments. Even though it pained Sunny to let go of 2 ascended memories, he knew that this was for the best. It was going to give Kai an opportunity to grow stronger in the next month and be better prepared for the nightmare. Plus, he still had Morgan's warbow and the strike of thunder. Kai frowned in confusion, then stared into emptiness, clearly reading the runes. Then, an excited light ignited in his eyes.
Oh, thank you, Sunny.
Sunny scowled.
Now don't get me wrong, this is not a gift. I am lending them to you, lending you understand. Brilliant Emporium is a respectable business, not a charity. I'll be expecting a full repayment or an exchange of equal value. In the future, got it?
Kai beamed and looked at him with a wide smile, calling him sweet. Sunny's scowl deepened. He grumbled to himself, wondering what Kai meant by sweet and what was wrong with this idiot, considering he had just told him he was now in debt. The sun was already rising, and that meant that they had to part ways. Each had a lot of things to do. When everyone left, Sunny stared at the table full of empty plates for a while and then sighed. Somehow, he felt that they won't be able to have a nice dinner like this for a while. It was already morning, so he didn't bother going to sleep and just brewed himself more coffee, poured it into a cup, and went to sit on the porch. The mental fatigue of the long planning session made his thoughts a bit slow, but Sunny knew that he would be able to remain awake and lucid for a couple more days without any problem. He wasn't going to return to the dream realm until all his business in the waking world was taken care of. So, Sunny just rested for a bit, watching the dawn and unhurriedly thinking through all the things that had to be done.
And say goodbye to teacher Julius. Talk to Aiko about the Emporium.
The second nightmare could take a lot of time to conquer, so there was a question of how long the supply of soul shards he had given her would last. Sunny didn't want to return and discover that his store had closed doors and lost all its clients. He took a sip of coffee and looked down. Of course, there was a very real possibility that he would not return at all. Sunny did not delude himself, no matter how powerful he was and how swift his progress had been. This nightmare was going to be nothing except for absolutely deadly, like all nightmares were. Better people than him had ventured inside and never returned. The possibility of death was very real. Was there even a point in planning for the future? As he thought about it, suddenly, a sound of light steps could be heard on the path leading to the porch. Sunny smiled a little and then looked up. Rain was standing a few steps away, looking at him with a bit of awkwardness.
Are your guests still here?
He shook his head.
Good, I mean bad, I just wanted to talk to you. Alone, that's all.
Sunny raised an eyebrow and asked what it was about, despite the fact that Rain was obviously trying to be apologetic and respectful. A familiar angry light ignited in her eyes.
You know what about, sorry.
She stumbled, remained silent for a few moments, and then asked in a more polite tone.
Why didn't you tell me that you are a big deal?
Sunny stared at Rain for a bit, then smiled.
Have I not told you that I am probably the strongest awakened in the world, the best of best, and all that? I think it happened right here on this spot. Rain scowled.
I'm being serious.
Sunny took a sip of coffee and looked at her for a few moments. Slowly, the smile disappeared from his face. Finally, he sighed and looked away.
Because I'm not, as far as awakened go, I am not a big deal at all. In fact, I am very small and easily squashed, so I don't like to advertise my prowess. It's best that everyone thinks of me as weak and stupid. That way, I'll be much harder to kill.
Rains looked at him in confusion.
I don't understand. How would nightmare creatures know that you are considered strong? Why would that put your life in danger?
A dark, sad smile appeared on Sunny's face. He glanced at Rain and then asked,
Who said anything about the nightmare creatures?
Sunny put his cup on the floor, then said,
After you left, you must have searched the network for all the information about the forgotten shore you could find, right?
Rain blushed and then nodded. He nodded too.
Then you must know that around 400 sleepers died during the siege of the Crimson Spire, so many. But do you know how many were killed in the months before? Almost twice that.
Her eyes widened slightly. Sunny looked at the young girl, no levity in his voice anymore.
And they weren't killed by the nightmare creatures. They were killed by people. So, ironically, more humans were killed by other humans while I was out there in that hell than they were by monsters. Well, other monsters to be precise. And that is a lesson you are going to have to learn if you want to become strong. He sighed. I can teach you how to hold a sword or a spear, how to traverse the dream realm and not starve, and how to kill your enemies. But I can teach you how to be strong, Rain. That is something that you can only learn yourself, this world. It is a cruel and ruthless place. Some people are lucky enough to never learn its truth, but some do, and out of those, soft ones never survive. You are very, very soft, but are you lucky? I don't know. It's up to you.
She listened to him attentively, an expression that was a bit too serious and somber for a girl her age appearing on her face. After a while, she said,
I think I understand.
Sunny smiled.
I hope that you do, but also a part of me hopes that you don't.
He hesitated, then took out his communicator.
Oh, and by the way, our lessons are going to have to stop for a while. My friends and I are going on a big expedition, you see, and I am not sure how long it is going to take. Don't worry though, I have already taught you enough for you to continue practicing on your own. Do it diligently and don't get lazy. If you feel that you mastered everything before I return, call the number I just sent you. It belongs to a friend of mine. Her name is Aiko, and she'll find you a new tutor.
Rain stared at her communicator for a long time, then looked at him and asked quietly,
You are going on a big expedition.
Sunny showed her a carefree smile and shrugged. confirming it with a casual sure and asking why.
Will it be dangerous?
He picked up his coffee, took a sip, and then shrugged again.
Dangerous, yeah, of course. Really dangerous, I guess, but anything having to do with spell is.
Rain looked at him with sudden intensity, her previous timidness gone. When she spoke, her voice rang with tension.
Then why are you going?
Sunny looked at her in bewilderment, and then suddenly threw his head back and laughed. When he was done laughing, he glanced at her and said with an amused smile,
Why, the same reason you wanted to train, to become strong, really strong.
Some time later, Sunny waiting in a cafe looking out of the window at a lively street outside. People were rushing past, in a hurry to get inside before the heavy clouds covering the bleak sky erupted with rain. The subtle smell in the air told him that this was going to be a bad one, maybe not toxic enough to burn through clothes, but still unpleasantly hazardous. The acid rain didn't bother Sunny too much, since it was something everyone was accustomed to, even in the outskirts. People knew how to avoid getting caught in one. Here in a prosperous part of the city, citizens had much more protections. What he was thinking about was the street itself. This was the same cafe he used to visit when observing rain, and the same street that had become a scene of panicked evacuation during the gate incident several months ago. Armored vehicles of the government had torn apart the road, and several violent skirmishes had spilled into the peaceful surroundings. And yet, there were no signs of the furious battle left. The road was long repaired and the battle damage mended. The cafe was open again and people went on about their business as though nothing had happened. They had endured the disaster and moved on, showing the astonishing resilience the human race possessed. Not even the nightmare spell could overcome it. At least it had not managed yet. Sunny sighed and glanced at the pastry in front of him. At that moment, the door of the cafe opened, and the familiar sensation of phantom cold enveloped him. Master Jet looked even more disheveled than usual, her uniform jacket actually sporting several small holes, their edges charred. However, she looked just as relaxed and strong as ever, her icy blue eyes radiating fierce energy. She seemed dead tired, but also somehow brimming with life. Jet looked around, noticed Sunny, and offered him a smile. Then she flicked a few flakes of soot off her epaulette, walked over, and crashed on the chair.
I hope that this pastry is for me.
He smiled and pushed the plate and a cup of fresh coffee toward her.
Of course.
Master Jet took a bite out of the pastry, closed her eyes in delight for a few moments, and then cradled the cup of coffee in her hands. After a while, she looked at him and sighed.
So, second nightmare, huh?
Sunny simply nodded. Soul Reaper Jet was the only Ascended he knew well enough to trust, a little, so he had asked her to meet him, hoping to receive some advice. Nothing he could read on the network or even in the staff library of the Academy could be as valuable as talking to a person who had actually conquered a seed once. She took a sip of coffee and shook her head. Jet muttered, calling him a crazy kid. A slight smile appeared on his face. Sunny retorted that he was not that much younger than her, he thought. Jet glanced at him with a dangerous grin and asked if he was asking her about her age, adding that she guessed she hadn't slapped him in a while. The two of them stared at each other for a few moments, and then laughed. In truth, Sunny knew that Master Jet was in her late 20s, so the age gap between them was not insignificant. Considering how much had happened to him in the past 2 years, 10 seemed like a lifetime. But at the same time, he wasn't a kid anymore, not by a long shot. He looked down, thought for a few moments, and then said,
Now is as good a time as any. I thought things through before deciding to challenge a seed. This is for the best.
She studied him for some time, then nodded.
I see. Well, there are a lot of benefits to being an Ascended. There are certain drawbacks too, but you don't need to worry about that for now. Right now, you need to concentrate on surviving the nightmare.
Sunny smiled and asked whether there was any wisdom a venerated elder like her could share with this ignorant junior. Master Jet glared at him, then took another bite of the pastry.
Elder, maybe I really should slap you.
She lingered for a few moments, then sighed.
The second nightmare. It is a lot like the first, but at the same time very different. The spell will send you and your cohort into an illusion of the past, one centered around a central conflict. To conquer the nightmare, you will have to resolve that conflict, one way or another. There is no right or wrong way to do so. You just have to end it somehow.
Jet fell silent, as though remembering her own trial. Her icy blue eyes stared into the distance.
That won't be easy, of course. Your friends might die. You might die too, but you know this already. Let's talk about the differences then. The first one is rather obvious. The nightmare will be larger, longer, and harder than your first one. The nightmare creatures populating it will be of higher ranks and classes, usually either awakened or fallen. But if you're unlucky, you might meet a corrupted one too.
Sunny grimaced. His first nightmare had pitted him against an awakened tyrant. What were the chances that he would get lucky this time and only encounter abominations within his ability to handle? Slim, Master Jet meanwhile continued.
The other difference is less talked about but very important. Unlike the first nightmare, this one won't be tailor-made for you personally. You're smart enough to think through the implications of that fact on your own, but I'll mention one thing that very few people consider. The spell will try to find you a body that closely resembles your own, but due to what I have just mentioned, it might not be as similar as what one might expect.
Sunny tilted his head and frowned, asking how different they were talking. She shrugged.
You will be of the same rank, that is certain. Your build will be more or less the same, but that's the thing. If you are unprepared in a fight, more or less might cost you your life. A specialist has to rely on his or her body. It is our first and most important tool. Imagine that you are suddenly slightly higher or shorter, your limbs are of a bit different length, your center of gravity has shifted a little. Many people died because they weren't quick enough or couldn't adapt to that sudden change.
Sunny closed his eyes for a moment. For a fighter, their body was like a well-oiled machine that they knew in and out. They knew every detail about it, how it moved, how it performed in any given situation, what it could accomplish, and what was beyond its ability. All battle techniques were finely tuned for that precise machine. Changing its parameters was like throwing a wrench into the mechanism, potentially causing its collapse. He had not known that detail. Luckily, now that he was informed, he would be able to prepare and shorten the adjustment period as much as possible.
Thank you. That is a very valuable piece of information.
Master Jet shook her head.
It's not like it's a secret. People just don't think about this stuff.
She hesitated, then said in a darker tone.
The last large difference. Hopefully, you won't have use for that knowledge, but if worse comes to worst, it is better to be prepared.
Sunny looked at her and raised an eyebrow, asking what she meant. She glanced at her cup, took a sip, and then carefully put it on the table.
The thing is, I said that there is no one way to conquer the nightmare. That means that some solutions can contradict each other, and people participating in the trial are not forced to aim for the same result.
He scowled. Sunny asked what exactly she was trying to say. Master Jet looked him in the eye and said, her voice cold and grim.
I am saying that not all challengers have to be on the same side. That rarely happens, but you should keep that in mind anyway.
Sunny stared at her for a few moments, then turned away. He wondered what she wanted him to realize. Was Master Jet warning him that his allies could betray him and turn into another obstacle he would have to overcome to escape the nightmare? Or saying that he could betray them if needed? They talked for a while, discussing various matters having to do with the nightmare seed and the trial itself. Sunny acquired a lot of useful information, as well as several pieces of valuable advice. But throughout the whole discussion, he continued thinking about that one statement.
Rarely happens, but you should keep that in mind anyway.
Sunny left the cafe and caught a train to go visit Aiko. After that, he traveled to the academy and said his goodbyes to teacher Julius. The old man was a bit emotional to let him go, but did not try to dissuade his unruly pupil. Instead, he tried to offer encouragement.
The second nightmare? Tooey! No student of mine can be killed by a mere second nightmare. Don't you dare put a stain on my reputation. Sonny, my boy, you hear me?
Finally, Sonny left the sleeper compound and stood outside for a while, watching the setting sun. Then he turned around and headed deeper into the academy complex. The room where Nephi slept did not change much. He replaced the flowers on one of the tables and sat down, looking at her pale and motionless face. No matter how many times Sonny came here, seeing her like this, brought a dull pain to his chest. The cauldron of emotions burning in his heart was too deep and seethed too furiously for him to understand it. Sonny was never good with emotions after all. There was resentment, longing, guilt, affection, fear, and hope. Looking at the transparent lid of the sleeping pod, he sighed.
Well, hey, Neff.
Just like before, this was the only thing he said out loud. He lingered for a bit and then thought.
You are still alive out there somewhere. That is good. That makes me happy. It really does. You know, right after everything happened, I wasn't sure if I wanted you to live. I thought that maybe it would be better for you to die. Sometimes I did.
Sonny lowered his head and closed his eyes tiredly.
But after a while, as time passed, I started to miss you more than I wanted to be free of you. Maybe what Master Jet said is true. Maybe no one is really ever free in this world. Maybe the only freedom there is the freedom to choose your own chains.
A dark smile appeared on his lips.
But that is the thing, isn't it? Even that choice was taken away from me, by you, by Cassie, by fate. I never had anything, and then I had even less than that. Wouldn't you be angry to be dealt a hand like that? Because I am so angry, and that is why I am never going to stop trying to break free. Screw truth and screw fate. Who said that its chains can't be broken?
Sonny shifted slightly and stared at the sleeping young woman with burning intensity.
I just have to get strong enough to rip them apart. You want to destroy the spell? Well, I want to destroy fate itself. Which one of us do you think is more crazy?
He suddenly laughed, his voice full of both mirth and bitterness.
If Weaver did it, why can't I? And if Weaver created it, why can't you break it? If that is our will, who dares to stop us?
Sonny smiled widely and then grew quiet again, his eyes full of darkness. After a while, he rubbed his face.
Anyway, Cassie and I are going to challenge the second nightmare soon. We might not be able to visit you again for a long time, so you take care of yourself, Neff. Don't disappoint me. I am counting on you to stay alive, to keep me striving to surpass you.
With that, he sighed heavily, stood up, and left without looking back. It was finally time for him to sleep too. Before climbing into his luxurious sleeping pod, Sonny had a conversation with Effie. He moved her pod into the underground dojo and installed it near his own. The two of them were most likely going to spend a long time in the nightmare, so the house had to be put on lockdown for the duration. Hopefully, Sonny would be able to do it himself after coming back through the gateway in Night Temple, but if things went wrong with the representatives of Valor, Effie was in charge of making the final preparations. He gave her the passwords from the security system and explained the procedure. Then, Sonny ran the diagnostic on the pod, made sure that it was functioning perfectly and could sustain his body for months, if not years, inside. It didn't matter, really. After entering the seed, he would either die or become a master. If the former happened, the well-being of his physical body was a moot point. If the latter happened, paradoxically, the same statement applied. Ascension merged the physical body with the spirit body. However, even if the physical body was completely destroyed, the process would create a new one. So, maybe it was more appropriate to say that ascension allowed the spirit body to become corporeal. In any case, the result was the same. That was why Effie wanted to become a master so badly, knowing that it would make her as strong and healthy as she was in the dream realm. Why many of the Lost dreamed of challenging the second nightmare as well. And that was why it didn't matter even if the sleeping pod malfunctioned and thoroughly roasted Sonny's physical body instead of preserving it. If the nightmare didn't kill him, he would be as good as new. Still, Sonny was very attached to his mortal shell. He didn't want any harm to come to it, if only out for sentiment reasons. With a sigh, he undressed, took one last glance at his spacious dojo, and climbed into the pod Effie, who was watching him silently from her wheelchair, strained to raise a hand and waved him goodbye.
Sweet dreams.
Sunny wanted to snarl at her and remind the gluttonous huntress to not leave dirty dishes all over the house, but he was just too tired. As soon as the lid of the metal sarcophagus started to move, his eyes closed, and he fell into the deep, dark embrace of sleep. When Sunny opened his eyes again, he was already in the sanctuary of Noctis. Sunny was standing on the edge of the island, looking at the heavenly chain that stretched far into the distance. His body was clad in a slender armor forged out of bleak steel, and in his hand was a somber black spear with a polished silver blade. Cassie was standing by his side, wearing her midnight blue coat beneath a polished cuirass. Her hand rested on the hilt of the quiet dancer, and an elegant half-mask rested on her face. A few strands of her long, golden hair were blowing in the wind. They were ready to depart. Sunny glanced at the two of them, then at the dull steel of the undying chain. He wasn't foolish enough to fail to recognize that this was exactly how her vision of their death happened. With the two of them alone and him wearing metal armor, the only thing missing was the snow. But Sunny didn't care. He had been deceived by the knowledge of the future once, and all his desperate attempts to avoid it had only helped the vision happen. This time, he was not going to allow himself to be a pawn of fate. He was going to do what needed to be done in a way he wanted to do it, and face the consequences without regret. Sunny sighed, glanced at Cassie, and said,
Let's go.
With that, he took a step forward and plunged off the edge of the island. When they started their expedition, the last vestiges of summer warmth were leaving the Chained Isles. Not every region of the Dream Realm had seasons that were the same as those of the waking world, but this one was somewhat similar. By the time they were supposed to reach Night Temple, autumn would be in full swing. If everything went well, the journey was going to take 2 or 3 weeks. Sunny wanted to reach the mysterious citadel and retrieve the ivory knife by the middle of October, then rendezvous with Effie. Kai and the fire keepers at the shipwreck island in the first days of November. That would give them almost a full month to reach the Ebony Tower and enter the Seed before winter. Of course, in the Dream Realm, one could never put too much faith in any plan. Sunny felt reasonably confident in his ability to travel across Chained Isles, but he knew not to get arrogant. This was a wild and deadly land, one full of fearsome creatures and insidious threats. He had explored many islands and hunted down many abominations here, but even after 9 months of fighting and traveling across the region, Sunny was only well acquainted with the southeastern part of it, where the sanctuary of Noctis was located. He had never ventured west or north of the tier. The situation was only made worse by the fact that the closer one got to the vast emptiness at the heart of the Chained Isles, the more dire dangers they would face. To reach Night Temple quickly, Sunny and Cassie had to reach the tier and skirt around its edge, which meant that they would be moving through the most perilous area of the entire region. Not all was bad, though. Cassie had some of the knowledge that Sunny lacked, since the fire keepers had spent a lot of time in the northern reaches of the Chained Isles. He also had all the information copied from Mordred's map, which contained a detailed description of many places they were going to have to travel through. He was strong enough to face the dangers that awaited them there, and Cassie wasn't defenseless anymore. The two of them were enough, most likely. These were the reasons why Sunny had decided to attempt the expedition without a full cohort. The following days proved that he had been right in his decision. Their journey was surprisingly smooth. The traversal itself provided no problems. Cassie was more than capable of moving from island to island without his help, which was a relief. Due to her second aspect ability and the quiet dancer, the blind girl was able to move through space with an adequate measure of accuracy. As it turned out, she also had an ascended charm that provided a powerful augmentation to a single echo which she used on her rapier. With its help, the dancer could carry her weight for a short distance, which allowed Cassie to get to and off the chains with ease. The only drawback of the charm was that it ate through her soul essence rapidly, and she couldn't use it often or for too long. Of course, traversal was the least of their problems. As they traveled further into the heart of the Chained Isles, more and more nightmare creatures picked up their scent. That was where Sunny came in. With the help of Saint, and when needed the Soul Serpent, he was able to deal with anything that dared to attack them. Cassie helped too, but there was rarely anything for her to do. Sunny and his shadows were just too swift, cunning, and deadly. Their combined power was almost terrifying. That was not to say that the blind girl was useless. On the contrary, her presence was perhaps the single most important factor of why they were able to move toward their goal with such ease. Her great affinity of revelations, keen senses, and supernatural intuition complemented Sunny's battle prowess perfectly. It was almost disturbing how well they worked together, him scouting ahead and obliterating monsters, her guiding them through the maze of shifting aisles in a way that took them past the true horrors, the hidden hazards, and the crushing. The strangest part about all of this was that they didn't even talk to each that much, yet were able to achieve such a deep level of understanding. Most of the journey was spent in silence, with both of them preferring not to speak to another unless absolutely necessary. There was no small talk, no irrelevant conversations, and no friendly banter. Sunny didn't even talk to his shadows and Saint like he was already used to, which made the silence almost suffocating. It was indeed a bit awkward in the beginning, but then he got used to it. He actually started to enjoy the peace and quiet as well as the company of another human being, even if it was Cassie. Their cooperation was efficient, seamless, and not burdened with emotions and other troublesome complications. An alliance of pure convenience. What was there to complain about? They traveled across islands that were barren and stark, and across islands that were lush with beautiful verdure, across islands that teemed with vile abominations, and islands that were full of nothing but bones and ash, across islands that were open and vast, and islands that were small and hid unseen dangers behind a veil of deception. It wasn't long before a day arrived when a dark line became visible far away over the northern horizon. When Sunny first saw it, he stood motionlessly for a while, looking north with a dark expression. The hollow mountains. After so long, he finally saw them again. Every day after that, the black line grew bigger and closer. Soon, he was already able to discern individual peaks and the jagged shape of the mountain chain that pierced the sky like the fangs of a colossal dragon. And on the day that the dark peaks towered above, shrouded in flowing mist, they finally reached Night Temple. The chain swayed lightly as Sunny and Cassie walked across it, rattling loudly from time to time. Since the island that they had just left was currently ascending, the one in front of them was below and fully visible. The northern island was not too large, maybe 2 kilometers in diameter. Its surface was one vast level plain, and covered entirely by a beautiful field of violet flowers, as though wrapped in a silken mantle, despite the fact that the sun was high in the sky. The buds of the delicate flowers closed. From what Cassie had told him, Sunny knew that they would open only at night, emanating an eerie and beautiful light. He would have liked to witness that strange and magical sight himself, but right now, there were far more important things for them to do. Not to mention that, at the moment, Sunny's attention wasn't even on the island itself. Instead, he was looking past it at the draconian peaks of the hollow mountains that towered above the island, submerging it into their vast and deep shadow. They were shrouded in white mist that flowed slowly down the dark slopes and fell into the black abyss of the sky below like an endless wall of white, swirling clouds. The image of it was both magnificent and frightening. It was as though the sky itself was slowly being devoured by the lightless void, or maybe invading it. Looking at the dreadful mountains, Sunny couldn't help but wonder if Nephi's was currently lost somewhere out there in the white mist. Or had she not dared to enter it, and instead chose one of the other directions? There was no way to know. With a sigh, he looked down and concentrated on putting one foot in front of the other. Soon, they reached the northern island and flew up. Sunny with the help of the prowling thorn and the dark wing, Cassie by unsheathing the quiet dancer jumping, and holding tightly to the hilt as the flying rapier pulled her into the air. The two of them landed softly amidst the delicate flowers and looked around, without the need to say anything. Sunny allowed the blind girl to take the lead and followed her as they walked toward the only landmark on the island, the ruins of the ancient fortress that perched precariously on its northern edge. It was very similar to the crumbled stronghold where he had met Effie and Kai. Trying not to disturb the flowers, they crossed the island and entered the fortress. Nothing attacked them on the way, and there were no sounds except for the whistling of the wind and that of their footsteps. The northern island was beautiful, silent, and strangely peaceful. Looking through the broken gateway of the ancient stronghold, Sunny studied the colossal chain that anchored the isles to the hollow mountains. The swirling mist flowed down on both sides of it, obscuring the point where the chain sunk into the dark stone. He remained motionless for a few moments, then shivered and looked away. At the very corner of the platform that lay beyond the gate, almost unnoticeable, a narrow set of stairs led down. Cut from weathered rock, the path snaked around the overhanging slope, clinging to the stone's surface as it led to the dark side of the island. Cassie put one hand on the stones and, tracing her fingers across them, cautiously stepped onto the stairs. Sunny followed, looking down with a dark expression. The path leading to the Night Temple was long and narrow. There was barely enough space for two people to walk side by side. To his right was the stone wall of the island, and to his left was the bottomless dark abyss of the sky below. One careless step could spell a person's doom. The placement of the stairs was not accidental as well. If an attacking force tried to lead an assault down the path, they would have had to fight the defenders one at a time, with the movements of the fighter's right hand being restricted by the slope. Range attacks wouldn't help much due to the curvature of the wall too. In a place like that, one warrior could stop an entire army. They descended lower and lower, finally reaching the dark side after a long time. At the point where the slope turned almost completely horizontal, the stairs transformed into a strange hanging bridge that was attached to the stone surface above by rusty chains. It swayed precariously above the dark chasm of the sky below, leading all the way to the center of the aisle, to the Night Temple. Sunny froze, startled by a mournful sound of a loud bell that suddenly rolled through the darkness. In front of him, at some distance, a magnificent structure protruded from the underbelly of the floating island. Made out of black stone, it resembled a tall, somber cathedral that was somehow built upside down and hovered above the abyss of impenetrable darkness. The foundation was its highest point, and its 7 belfries descended into the depths of the black void, each ending with a short chain that held a massive bell cast of tarnished green copper. Since Night Temple was located under the island, the light of the sun never reached it. Instead, the cathedral was shrouded in eternal shadow, with only the pale shining of the distant divine flames caressing its black walls. In a strange reversal, the velvet darkness of the abyss and the scattering of false stars in its depths seemed like a vast night sky hanging above it. As Sunny watched, a second bell rang. He shifted a little and turned his attention to the narrow path tracing its treacherous steps all the way to the massive iron gates of the cathedral. Cassie turned to him, lingered for a moment, and said they should go, that the sentinels had already seen them. Sunny nodded and took a step forward. Night Temple waited ahead, its gates opened like a hungry mouth. As they walked toward the gates, Sunny asked quietly what happens now exactly. Cassie thought for a few moments before answering. She was not sure, saying that it depended on whether Saint Cormac was inside the citadel or out exploring the hollow mountains. In any case, her standing should be good enough to at least get an audience with one of the masters overseeing the temple in his absence. She hesitated, then added that if they were allowed inside, there were several rules he must follow. Outsiders weren't allowed to summon any memories or echoes inside the citadel. They could only go into the allowed areas unless a master was escorting them. They might not speak with the inhabitants of the temple unless they addressed them first. Additionally, all items they brought inside had to be inspected. Sunny frowned. The rules were not only strange, but also strict and would put him at a disadvantage should anything happen. However, he remembered Sky Tide's warning. She told him not to break any rules inside Night Temple. He conceded that he wouldn't do anything risky unless absolutely necessary, and that they should see how this plays out first. As they approached the ornate gates, 2 figures became visible standing on both sides of it. One was a man and the other was a woman. Both sentinels were in their 30s and had calm, cold, dangerous eyes. Sunny thought to himself that these must be the Lost. It was his first time meeting their kind. In truth, There was not much difference between them and those awakened who had not lost their physical bodies. That was not to say that the sentinels were ordinary. Both radiated an imposing, overbearing aura. Just from how the lost held themselves, Sunny could tell that they were extremely experienced and fearsome warriors. Their armors were perfectly crafted, and their weapons had a dangerous luster, all clearly of a high rank. The pressure these sentinels exerted reminded him of the oldest and most deadly hunters of the Dark City, those who had survived long years of bloody battles in the hell of the Forgotten Shore. If he was honest, he had to admit that most awakened anchored at the sanctuary of Noctis seemed like children when compared to the two lost. These people were no joke, and there were 100 more inside the cathedral, if what Cassie had told him was true, if all of them were the same as the sentinels. Sunny suppressed a shiver. He might have vastly underestimated the scale of the force that Clan Valor had stationed at the precipice of the Hollow Mountains. The somber cathedral hid an entire army, but why only keep the lost here? What purpose could it serve? The mystery had been tormenting him ever since he learned of it. At some point, one of the sentinels raised a hand, commanding them to stop. He studied both Sunny and Cassie for a while, and then said in a cold voice that it was a nice surprise to see Lady Song of the Fallen again, and that he hoped the other members of her cohort were well. His tone did not match the friendly words at all. The blind girl simply nodded. Cassie replied that they were well and in good health, anchored at the sanctuary of Noctis. The second sentinel raised an eyebrow and asked what had prompted Cassie to make the long journey and return to their modest citadel. In the company of a stranger and without her loyal comrades, no less, Cassie glanced at Sunny and smiled. She said that this was awakened Sunless and that he was not a stranger. In fact, he was a dear friend of hers and one of the few people in this world she would trust with her life. Both of them used to be Lady Changing Star's companions. Sunny almost choked, marveling inwardly at such smooth lies. The blind girl, meanwhile, lingered for a moment, and then ventured that they hoped to have an audience with Lord Cormac. The sentinels remained silent for a while, making Sunny feel a bit nervous. Finally, one of them answered that Lord Cormac was carrying out one of his missions, and that he wouldn't be back for several weeks at least. Cassie's smile didn't waver. Without skipping a beat, she said, her voice as polite and pleasant as before, that she would like to see Sir Pierce or Ladywell then. The sentinels looked at each other. After a while, one of them sighed and told them to wait there. With that, he disappeared, leaving Sunny and Cassie under the heavy gaze of the remaining lost. Sunny stared back, shamelessly studying the sentinel. No matter how he tried, he couldn't tell the difference. She looked just like a normal awakened would in the dream realm. Well, it made sense. Her spirit body was the same after all. It was also shaped very nicely. The white feather guard snapped at him, demanding to know what he was staring at. Boy. Sunny looked up and smiled. For a moment, he was very tempted to answer honestly, but then his common sense won out. He offered that her armor seemed like a fine memory. The sentinel snarled and didn't say anything. After some time, the second one returned and beckoned them to follow. They were led into a small, chilly room at the side of the gate and handed 2 sets of simple garments made out of crude cloth, then locked inside. Sunny stared at the bundle in his hands with a perplexed expression and muttered, asking what that was for. Cassie sighed and unbuckled her belt, then dismissed the quiet dancer and placed its empty scabbard on a bench. She reminded him that no memories or echoes were allowed. Sunny frowned, then glanced at his armor. If he dismissed it, he would be more or less naked. He asked if they were expecting them to change right there. The blind girl silently turned her back to him. Sunny hesitated for a moment, then did the same. His shadow looked away too. Cursing inwardly, he dismissed the undying chain and felt the shadows in the tiny room shift as Cassie's cuirass and coat crumbled into a rain of sparks. They were close enough for him to hear the steady beating of her heart and sense the heat emanating from her body. Trying not to let his imagination wander, Sunny put on a pair of simple trousers and heard the fabric rustle as it slid across her smooth skin. He grumbled that the bastards couldn't give them 2 rooms to change. Suppressing his anger, Sunny put on a tunic and frowned. Its sleeves were too short to hide the coils of the soul serpent. More than that, they revealed the 2 shadows that were wrapped around his body, shrouding it in a thin layer of darkness. Not to mention that both the tunic and the trousers were several sizes too big for him. With a sigh, Sunny commanded the shadows to crawl up his arms, hiding them from sight. Then, he dismissed the serpent and bent down to roll up the pant legs and put on a pair of leather sandals and cleared his throat. He called out, asking if she was done. Cassie answered after a short pause that yes, she was. The clothes provided to her consisted of similar sandals and a long tunic that left her shoulders bare and her legs exposed below the knee. The silver half-mask was gone, too, revealing Cassie's beautiful blue eyes. Sunny stared at her for a few moments, realizing that he had almost forgotten how they looked. Then he scowled and banged on the door. Soon, the same sentinel let them out and led them through into the depths of the night temple. As soon as they left the gateway behind, Sunny tensed, as though expecting something terrible to happen. But nothing did. The sentinel glanced at him and frowned, asking what he was waiting for and telling him to come, that Sir Pierce would be with them shortly. The interior of the somber cathedral was as bizarre as its exterior. Sunny expected the actual floors to be constructed properly, and some of the corridors they walked through were. But other parts of Night Temple were upside down, as well, the flat floors serving as ceilings and the arching ceilings serving as uneven floors. And that was just the outward ring. He didn't even want to imagine how the temple itself and the inner sanctum looked. As they walked, he saw several lost silently going about the mundane business of maintaining the citadel. They were dressed in the same crude clothes he was now wearing and wielded no weapons. However, every one of them, from a person calmly changing the oil in the wall lamps to a man sweeping the floors, radiated the same aura of strength and lethality as the two sentinels that had met them at the gate. They were all battle-hardened veteran elites. Sunny wondered to himself just what this place was. After descending a few sets of twisting stairs, Sunny and Cassie were led to another, slightly bigger room. That one had a large table in its center. The sentinel gestured at it and said, his voice not betraying any emotions, that Sir Pierce was on his way, and asked them to present the items they had brought from the outside for inspection. Cassie took a step forward and placed her belt and scabbard on the table. The Lost shifted his gaze to Sunny and waited. Sunny muttered that all his things were stored inside a memory. He considered hiding the existence of the covetous coffer but thought better of it. There was nothing inside of it worth hiding anyway, or rather almost nothing. The sentinel frowned, then demanded in a dark tone that he summon it. Soon, the small box was sitting on the table. Sunny opened it and started producing item after item, slowly building a large pile. They were spices, cooking utensils, hygienic products. Several packs of underwear, both male and female, which earned him a strange look. A piece of a broken mirror, a couple of soul shards, a folding chair, various snacks, packs of tea and coffee, and many more. As the pile slowly became larger and larger, the sentinel's face grew more and more incredulous. Finally, his eye twitched, and he demanded to know how much trash Sunny had in that box. Sunny smiled and called out that he was almost finished. He fished out a tube of sunscreen and several sticks of lip balm, threw them into the pile, then thrust his arm into the maw of the covetous coffer up to the shoulder, swept its bottom a few times, ignoring Weaver's needle and diamond string, then finally took a step back. Sunny said that that was all. The Lost shook his head and started picking up the items one after another, inspecting them carefully. What he was expecting to discover, Sunny did not know. At that moment, the door of the room opened, and a tall man with sharp features and steely eyes came in. His dark hair was cut short, and there was stubble on his cheeks. The man wore a scale armor forged out of lusterless blue steel, and held himself with the relaxed confidence of an experienced killer. Sunny didn't need an introduction to realize that he was standing in front of a master, and a powerful one at that. Sir Pierce seemed to be less frightening than Morgan of Valor. But Morgan was barely older than Effie, while this man had a decade or two to sharpen his skill and accumulate battle experience. He was a knight of valor still. Sunny harbored no illusions. In front of this monster, neither Cassie nor he stood a chance, especially not while surrounded by an army of 100 awakened elites. Sunny asked himself why he was even thinking about this, that they were here to talk, not fight. And they really needed this conversation to go well. Depending on how convincing they could be and how receptive Sir Pierce was, Sunny would either have to do things the easy way, the hard way, or abandon his plans to retrieve the second knife altogether. The sentinel greeted the master respectfully, and then continued to inspect the mountain of items Sunny had produced from the covetous coffer. Sir Pierce glanced at it for a moment, then turned to Cassie and welcomed awakened Kasha back to the Night Temple. Cassie bowed slightly and acknowledged Sir Pierce. Sunny suppressed the desire to roll his eyes, thinking to himself that it was as though he were invisible. Both the sentinels and the formidable master had ignored his existence entirely, preferring to address the blind girl. Part of the reason must have been that they already knew her, but mostly it had to do with her status as a bearer of a true name. Well, it suited Sunny perfectly. He liked to remain as unnoticeable as possible. Sir Pierce and Cassie exchanged several pleasantries. Slowly approaching the discussion of the real issue, Sunny listened attentively, knowing how much rode on this conversation. At some point, however, he got distracted. He wondered what that was, thinking he had heard someone sigh deeply behind him. No, he definitely did. But there was no one there. Sunny frowned, wondering if he was hallucinating or something else. It was then that a familiar voice suddenly resounded in his ears. Mordred said that he was so glad Sunless had made it. Sunny's eyes widened slightly. He looked at the sentinel Cassie and Master Pierce. None of them showed any sign that they had heard anything. Turning away as though to stare at the wall, he hid his face and said in a barely audible whisper that Mordred should tell him where he had been calling him a bastard. His words sounded harsh, but his tone was actually elated. The voice chuckled, making Sunny feel a bit tense for some reason. Was it just him? Or did the mysterious prince sound a bit different? Mordred mused that he had been with Sunny this whole time, watching as he traveled across the dream realm, and that he had simply chosen not to speak. Sunny blinked a couple of times. A heavy, cold feeling settled in his chest. Something was wrong. Very, very wrong. He demanded to know why Mordred had chosen not to speak. Mordred remained silent for a few moments, then said in his usual pleasant tone that with how cautious Sunny was. He had been afraid that Sunny wouldn't come if he said too much. Sunny wondered what Mordred meant. He felt his heart beating wildly in his chest. His intuition was sounding the alarms, filling him with a sudden feeling of dread. He asked, "Come where here to the Night Temple?" At that moment, the sentinel picked up the piece of the broken mirror from the pile. Mordred spoke again, his voice still friendly, but suddenly much colder and deeper beneath the surface, like a dark and restless ocean hiding under a thin veil of mist. He said that indeed, he was grateful to Sunless for bringing this piece of mirror to him. Sir Pierce casually glanced at the sentinel while responding to Cassie. His gaze stopped at the mirror. In the next moment, his pupils widened. Mordred added that he was very sorry for what was about to happen next. The formidable master was suddenly near the table, the lost throne aside. The piece of the mirror was in his hand. Throwing a wild look at Sunny, he screamed, demanding to know where the boy had found it and telling him to answer. Sunny took a step back, stunned, and stammered, trailing off without finishing. He remembered St. Tyrus telling him not to mention Reckoning Island. However, at the moment, it seemed like Pierce would rip him apart if Sunny dared to twist the truth even a little. So he answered honestly that he had found it on Reckoning, picking it up after slaying a strange creature. Sir Pierce stared at him for a moment, and then his face suddenly changed. It became deathly pale and motionless, as though aged by 10 years. His eyes grew wide and glassy. The fearsome master was terrified, but before any of them could do anything, a thin crack appeared on the shard in his hand. And in the next moment, all Sunny could hear was the sound of breaking mirrors.